Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
I can send people the link if it's live.
Go, Jack.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to a bonus episode for July of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy here with David Park, and our guest here is Kate Rocklein. Mm-hmm. This is a kind of a special episode, a unique episode, a little bit different than a lot of what we've done in the past. Kate has the distinction of, or you have two PhDs, right?
Yeah, I have a clinical doctorate and a research doctorate.
And you work in academia, and your focus of much of your research has been into special operations suicides.
Kind of, yeah, in a sense.
And you, again, you're in this very unique situation, I think, in that you've studied this subject academically, committed a lot of your professional life towards it, but at the same time, you also lived it because you were married to a soldier, Michael Froede, who served in a secret Army intelligence unit and took his own life. And, you know, I think what's, in talking to you and learning about Michael, what's especially horrifying about it is that because of your academic background, you were studying TBIs way before a lot of people even knew what a TBI was.
Yeah, way before the Army really had quantified
Yeah. And so when you saw these things happening to Michael, you knew exactly what was happening. But even then, I mean, with that knowledge, could not stop. I mean, you certainly tried, but you can't force somebody to get help if they don't want to get help.
Yep.
And I mean, it's just so horrifying and heart-wrenching that, you know, I can only imagine being in your position and seeing Michael go down this very dark path and being unable to pull him back from the brink. And you two also have two daughters together. Yeah. Who are doing great today, thank God. And, you know, we linked up. I wrote an article for Yahoo News about Michael Froede. I interviewed you. I met your daughters. I interviewed Michael's mother. I interviewed other people in the intelligence community because there was a lot of unanswered questions about what happened to Michael, what he went through. You were great in the sense that, I mean, you gave me a stack of documents like that tall and had videos and audio and all. You, like, as far as like journalistically, like that never happens where like somebody has everything all together for you. It never works out like that, but you had a lot of information to give me, and then I could complete some of these interviews to try to at least try to put the story together, and learn what Michael did in the Army, what he went through, what his teammates went through with him, and I hope we can talk a little bit about that, about your story and Michael's story, and also about, you know, you can also bring this sort of critical academic lens to this subject and analyze it in a way that I think a lot of people can't. So I'm really grateful that you were able to come and join us here in our studio today.
I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad I was able to make the flight. So yeah, I'm glad. Happy to see you again.
So can we start sort of with your origin story? Like, you know, what was your family like growing up? Did you have veterans in your family? What drove you into your specific, like, your line of study? How did you, your everything like that?
Yeah. So actually, my grandfather was a frogman. He was the UDT in World War II, so precursor to the SEALs. You know, aunts, uncles, not really in the military. My dad's side, my uncle was in the military, and then his son, my brother, went into the military. But I actually met Michael kind of by a fluke. I was a trauma nurse in Pennsylvania, and he was in between college and going into SOPC. And so we met in a true military form, got married like 6 months later, I think. Right. So, in Michael's words, like, there's no way that I was bringing you to Fort Bragg single. Like, I was putting a ring on it. So, got married at the Infantry Chapel at Benning in 2004. And then he did airborne, moved to Bragg. And then I started working at Womack.
Okay.
As an ER nurse. And then got stationed in overseas after that. And I was starting to see these soldiers coming back. So, like, 04, 05, 06. just really like non-specific neurological symptoms. And I'm not like a neuro person. I'm not a psych person. Like I like it when your limbs are falling off, you know, like serious resuscitation stuff. And being a military spouse, I would see women, you know, married to, you know, senior officers or sergeants major, and a lot of them didn't have anything tangible in their own career to take with them when their husband's career was over, their spouse's career was over. And so I figured, you know, every duty station I wanted to get another degree or get a certification or something. And so for my master's, when I had to choose a topic for that thesis, I thought, well, it's right in front of me. I'm seeing mostly, I don't want to exclude women, but it was mostly guys coming back with these really life-altering blast injuries.
How were they presenting themselves, these sort of undefined neurological things? Like what first started cluing you in that like something's going on here?
What really brought it home for me was I had someone from Ranger Bat sitting in my office bawling his eyes out. His wife had left him. His life was falling apart. And maybe it was the trauma specialist in me. And the Army, to be fair, as a civilian, had trained me to the same level as a nurse officer, right? So instead of focusing on like the psychosocial aspect of it, I was focusing on the clinical aspect of it. And I was thinking, what would make your life fall apart in 6 months to this degree? And then I was asking, okay, so how are you sleeping? How are you eating? He's like, I'm not sleeping. You know, my appetite's off. I can't focus. And I'm like, okay, have you been in an accident? Did you have any kind of head trauma? And then he said, well, you know, I was around a lot of blasts. You know, there's a lot of blasts that went off. And I'm like, there you go. So when I asked him, I said, well, how many? And he just started laughing.
Yeah.
He's like, well, I don't know.
All of them.
Yeah. He's like, I don't know, how per day? And then he was just asking me per day. And then, you know, and then I was thinking as well from what he was saying and then talking to other soldiers and clinicians that I worked with, it's the armament as well. It's the caliber of weapons. It's, you know, all of that blast overpressure is really, really damaging to very delicate neurological tissues. And so the DOD in true form, I did my thesis work, you know, under their umbrella, and they very kindly stole my data, which is fine. So I think in 2009, I had my master's was focused on estimating the incidence of TBI in ground forces from Iraq and Afghanistan from 2004 to 2007. And I stopped at the surge because that would have skewed the data. And so the DOD and my data were pretty much aligned. I mean, statistically, there was really no daylight. And, you know, it's a good 21% at that time. So that was like 2009. And then in starting my clinical doctorate, because I'd been looking at how TBI was evaluated in the military, and SOF was doing it better, you know, better testing. Sean Kane, one of the physicians at Bragg, had written some articles. I reached out to him. And then just, it's kind of like a Forrest Gump situation where, you know, 2-3 years later, when I started my clinical doctorate, I was working with some 18 Deltas just informally at Bragg who were teaching at the schoolhouse. And they said, you know, nobody's ever studied us. Our curriculum's from like 1970, 80 something. We're still doing stuff that has no basis in evidence or it's physician driven. And being a nurse, you have to be able to drive your own curriculum. So for my clinical doctorate, I looked at the framework and kind of the paradigms for how soft medics are taught. Are they taught from their own narrative experiences, being storytellers, right? Or is it physician driven? At the time, it was purely physician driven. So statistically, I was able to show that when you have curriculum that's founded in your own experiences and your own practice and not driven by another discipline, it tends to be better received, better learned, you know, it's assimilated better cognitively.
So are you saying that when it's physician driven, the physicians are saying this is what you need to learn as an SF medic, and when it's more narrative driven, that it is like the SF medics going, this is what we've been seeing out in the field, and we don't like, these are the things we need to deal with. Okay.
Right. Yes. I mean, you can dig deep into like, is it hermeneutics? Is it narrative pedagogy? You know, all that kind of stuff. And there's plenty of physicians in special operations who were long tabbed, who were 18 series something, right? But there's just as many who were never that. And they've been assigned to teach and practice within special operations without ever really of kicking indoors themselves.
Right.
And so when you have that kind of mismatch between experience, practice, and teaching, it can create some chasms.
Sure.
And then in the midst of that, I realized, oh, well, if I have a clinical doctorate, then I can't run my own studies. Like, that would be difficult. I would have to recruit a PhD to, structure them and that kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe it was spite, maybe I had something to prove, but on a whim, I applied to like the best PhD program in the States. As a challenge, I just kind of said I want to study like secondary trauma and actually in special operations spouses. And then 2017, Mike Montenuto, who was a hockey player, he was in the Disney movie Miracle. I think he was out on the West Coast in the first group, but he was back at Bragg and he taught my daughter how to skate. When we were at Bragg, taught her how to play some hockey. And he died by suicide within a day.
He was at first group.
Yeah, but I think he was at Bragg for something, maybe for teaching training, I don't know. And he died, I think, on April 23rd, 2017. And then within a day on the opposite coast, Ryan Larkin died. He was a SEAL medic. Mm-hmm. And his senior medic was still is a good friend, someone that I cherish. And he called me and he was like, this is just reaching epidemic proportions. And so, as a as a researcher, as an academic, I went into the body of evidence. Like, I'm looking through, databases and journals trying to see, like, what is the incidence and why are these guys dying by suicide? And at the time, it was all men, so I'm not trying to be exclusionary, right? Sure. But I'm thinking these are like the most resilient people I know.
Right.
And so why are they taking their own lives? Is it brain injuries? Is it what's going on? And like, if you've ever been midway through a PhD and you go to your advisor and you say, I want to switch my topic. I mean, they're looking at me like, you're out of your mind. Like, you've got just a year and a half left or something like that. I'm like, sorry, this is happening in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
So graciously, all gratitude to Rush University. That's science. You see a phenomena unfolding in front of your eyes. And they said, yeah, go for it. So it tacked on a couple extra years. And I started looking into that, doing a lot of background research, looking at the evidence. And there just really wasn't a lot. SOCOM actually hadn't published any suicide data since like 2016.
Yeah, they keep it really on the down low,
but they hadn't. It was almost like with the change of administrations, it used to be a lot more transparency from presidency to presidency almost. And then by 2016, it was just like a blackout. And I'm thinking, well, if there's no data, then, the military, it's like, there's no data, there's no problem. Right. But like the New York Times had published on it. There was a lot of print media about it, like about the emotional aspect of it, or why these operators are dying by suicide. But in the academic, like empirical literature, is just nothing. And so scientifically, when there's no empirical data, you have to just start talking to people. So qualitative research, right? And I'm a quantitative person. Like I teach graduate statistics. I like numbers. I like the analyses. And having those experiences with within special operations and knowing a lot of the medics, I was able to access people who would talk to me because I had kind of a 10-year relationship with some people in the community where they would actually open up and talk to me. So it was anonymous, but I did my dissertation on resilience, actually, because that's the antecedent, right? That's the precursor. So we know that you all are probably the grittiest, the hardiest, the most resilient. Look at the training that you've gone through, the places that you go to, the things that you survive. We know that there's no issue with resilience. So why is SOCOM throwing millions at like preservation of the force and family? Why is there like comprehensive soldier fitness and master resilience training? Like, why are these being thrown at soldiers and families, and why is it not working? So when I started digging into that, and I think I've talked to you about this, I realized that this positive psychology movement that Martin Seligman from Penn, and this thinking happy thoughts kind of
Right,
phenomenon,
right.
like gratitude, and all that's really important. But I really don't know anybody in the community who's ungrateful or super negative. I mean, you're salty,
Right.
But
Yeah,
I mean,
a bitching soldier is a happy soldier.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm
And
thinking.
if you have a traumatic brain injury, it's not a question of just like feeling a little down on yourself. Like
No.
you have a physiological problem. There's something physical has
Yeah,
happened to
yeah.
your brain to
Yeah.
change how you think and how you feel and your cognitive
Yeah.
functions. And just like a little mental exercise of like, here's how you should feel grateful. I mean, that's not going to help a person going through that.
No, and
Right.
actually for SOF, it's really damaging because positive psychology is if you are strange or weird or, atypical, which all of you are, let's face it, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you look at like the big 5 personality traits for SOF, you guys are a little bit off the ranch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you come at it from that approach, from that paradigm that, everything's normal, and if you just, are mindful and you center yourself and you think happy thoughts, which is kind of my, encapsulation of it, that your suicidality is going to go away.
Right.
No. And so it was kind of this merging of a bunch of different issues at once. And then Dan Pearl's paper started to come out of Bethesda, out of Walter Reed, where he was taking neurological tissue from operators or SOF guys who had died by suicide and finding astroglial scarring. So there is a physiological basis.
What is this scarring? Can you tell us what that is?
I will try.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
let's imagine that your brain is like a cantaloupe, right? But in the inside is just all jello, okay? And inside that jello, there's very intricate, delicate connections between your neuronal bodies. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so just bear with me. But when you shake it hard enough or you hit it hard enough and you do that chronically over time, it'll actually separate some of these structures. And, that separates your neural pathways. It prevents some neuroplasticity. I mean, it really can mimic PTSD in a sense. But if you medicate that the same way that you medicate PTSD, you're actually going to make it worse. You can actually precipitate suicide.
That was actually going to be my next question. But first, you mentioned when you were in Germany, you mentioned that the results were 21%. What was that?
Those are mine.
But what 21%? Like what
Ground
was
forces.
were exhibiting some sort of.
No, that they had been exposed to blasts.
Okay, all right.
At least.
Okay.
So that's, just the baseline estimate. If you're looking at 100 soldiers, 20 of them are probably going to have TBI
Okay.
at minimum.
Okay.
The number in SOF, I
mean,
have to pull out my
anybody
my
who's been
dissertation,
at a
but
door during a breach
Yeah.
and like multiple breaches a night, many nights in a
to
row.
like unpack this a little bit. I mean, I think I quoted you in the article that I wrote about explosive breaching.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Sergeant Major Vining
Yep.
and Chuck O'Connor,
Yeah.
who were the Delta Force and Dev Group Master Breachers, respectively. And also some other folks. Interviewed a Army neuroscientist at one point. And so I thought one of the interesting things was that there's a difference between a blast TBI and an impact TBI.
Right.
Like what football players get, what people get in car crashes, my understanding at least, is like an impact TBI, your brain and your body will heal from it eventually.
Yeah.
But with what guys, special ops guys or ground forces are experiencing with these blast TBIs is that blast wave just passes right through the body.
Yeah.
Right.
And since your body is like, what are we, 98, 99% water or something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you take a balloon and you squeeze it really, really hard, and then you let it re-expand, if you think about doing that to the brain and it's just crushed and then it re-expands, what happens is inflammation.
Right.
And what follows inflammation is scarring, to put it simply. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what's been happening.
So I think this is a really important point because I think that this has been missed for a long time. Because when we talk about special operations soldiers and suicide, it's like, well, that's really weird because like back in the 80s or the 90s, they did that study to find out that we had more neuropeptide Y, which helped us or whatever. So this stuff, but then all of a sudden you have, this community that you, like you say, is sort of resilient by nature,
Yeah, you're selected for that.
Yeah. And all of a sudden they're not resilient. They are they are these people who have like singular focus or are able to, handle massive amounts of stress are now like taking their lives. And I think that initially, at least popular wise, it was post-traumatic stress. They all have post-traumatic stress because they've seen all this combat. How were you able to peel TBI away? Because I'm sure that they are, they're not mutually exclusive and they're synergistic probably, but how were you able to pull that TBI away and say, look, this is something different and it needs to be treated differently?
So, in keeping in mind, like I'm a trauma specialist,
right.
Like clinically, I'm resuscitating, giving medications. So, there are far more erudite and educated people than I to speak to that, right? But this is my understanding of it.
Sure.
Is so post-traumatic stress disorder, that's a behavioral response, right? That's a behavioral response to situations, and some of that's normal.
Right.
Like combat stress reactions, post-traumatic stress, like if you are functioning normally and you've been in this, situation of extreme stress or extreme trauma, you should react a bit to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're sociopathic.
Which most soft people
You got,
have sociopathic
tendencies. You got a little touch of that, but you need a little touch of that, right? Which is why positive psychology and all this like resilience training doesn't really work.
Right.
At least on your population. So, so they'll separate the behavioral response. If you say you have a broken arm, right? You can't therapize or, pray away a broken arm, right? You actually need to set the arm and fix it.
Right.
You need neurological rehabilitation. And of course, throughout the 2000s, especially during surges, and SOF has the most repetitive deployment cycles. I think, as of 2018-19, SOF sustains 83% of combat fatalities. The stress that the military has put SOF under is astronomical. And so, when you have a physiological injury, trying to treat it with talk therapy or any other kind of thing, it's not going to work. You have to find something different.
Right.
And I think, the military is composed of extremely well-intentioned people who do genuinely care about its forces. But I think that, the good idea fairy has struck quite a bit.
Right.
And it has not borne out into good solutions.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, also traditionally the military has had an approach to something they don't understand as, well, you're malingering. You're trying to get out of work, or, and I'm sure that it's much different than that now, but they can only work within a certain realm, and if they find something they don't understand, then they don't understand it.
Well, and also if you think about it just politically, if all the generals or all the commanders who would speak truth to power have quit, or they don't want to be part of what's going on, or an endless war, and they've decided to just, tap out and retire or whatever, then you really don't have anyone saying the emperor has no clothes.
Right.
So then you're relying on academics to do it.
Right.
But then again, there's very few people in academia, because they're mostly civilians, who have lived and breathed what you all have lived and breathed, or at least been married to it. So you've got like really great big name universities doing really well-funded research, but then I'm looking through the research and I'm like, wait a second, the Army Stars studies and that kind of thing, very well-funded, well-published, but then they would combine their groups as to, well, these are medics and these are special forces. And I'm thinking, do they not know that special forces has medics? And then, special forces has no risk of suicide. Well, special forces was 0.2% of the population that you studied. So how are you not accessing these people, right? So, these conclusions that have been reached are just devoured by...
And that was as late as 2018 or something like that, right?
It was 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And,
they were still saying our soft population is low risk. We don't really have this problem.
Right.
And but at the time they were saying that, soft suicides had tripled more than the last 5 years combined. It was just, taking off. And then it became this thing in the academic literature of it's leveled off. Oh, I'm sorry. Is a plateau okay with you? Because I would prefer 0.
Right.
Right? 0 would be a better number than just leveling off.
Right.
Which means they're still dying by suicide.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
By mass numbers, it's not going up, so it's good.
Yeah, like, well, no data, no problem.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because I wonder how many Army officers or senior Army officers, because you know they have to get promoted, right? I mean, and they can't make big waves often if they want to, and how, like, for an officer who's given data that says, hey, like, these TBI presents these risks, it's like, well, they're still functional, like the mission requires this kind of op tempo. We can't just bring in a whole new batch of guys. There are no other guys.
Their job is to prepare their unit to deploy and go to war. And this PTSD TBI thing is maybe arguably by necessity an afterthought.
Right.
The war is your priority.
Right.
I mean, that's what happens when you don't draft people.
Yeah.
And as we know, like, special forces cannot be mass produced.
Right.
And you know that bubble of mass producing special operations personnel from like 2002 to 2006 or whatever it was, you know, just this like push to get a ton of special operations personnel into, you know, teams, and operational stuff gets missed.
Yeah.
You know, and then the waivers and, you know, all of this, like, just, you know, relaxing standards, and it's, you get this bubble, and that's what we're seeing 20 years later. Here's the bubble.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when you ignore the soft truths.
Right.
And
put the burden of the war on an increasingly smaller and smaller percentage of the military and the general population of the country.
yeah, I think it's like, finish the
Go
rock.
for it.
You are more than welcome to it.
It's very much a team room vibe, so I think the whiskey follows.
So I think just to maybe backtrack just a little bit and talk about, you know, some of, again, because these are things you studied, but they're also things you experienced.
And eventually I did. Yeah.
To roll things back in time to where 2007 or so, when your husband Michael was in the military. He was in the infantry, deployed to Iraq.
Yep.
His vehicle hits an IED, and
It was an EFP.
Okay. Oh, it was an EFP?
Right under his seat.
And,
oh, my gosh.
You happen to know the unit surgeon that he belonged to, and called him up, and because you knew about TBIs, and you said you need to put Michael in an MRI machine and check out his brain, and he responded to you something like, you know, if we put every soldier who had experienced blasts through an MRI machine, we'd set it on fire.
Yeah, and I think at that point they were spending $1 billion a week on the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
But God forbid, like, we have, you know, good diagnostic things. And I think my exact words to him in my email were, you know, Matt, I know just enough about TBI to be a real pain in your ass. And he was like, Kate, sorry, like, I don't have I can't evaluate
Oh,
it.
sorry, guys. I'm trying to pull up our questions. Go ahead.
Did you put a mood music on?
No, it is. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I got, you know, Michael called me from downrange, and, you know, I think, he, you know, as somebody like who handles trauma, handles emergencies, handles chaos professionally, I just lost it because I was just screaming at him. I'm like, I need the details. I need to know, were you unconscious? Did you lose consciousness? How many people were injured? Did anybody in your vehicle? Like, I was like just trying to get some kind of like clinical triage information. And when I calmed down for a second, you know, one guy had a detached retina. You know, they were all sent to get a good night's sleep or whatever. And Michael was intact. He walked out, and he was in the most proximal zone for it. But because he was walking and talking, you know, they just sent him to his Connex to get some sleep. And then I knew, like, I knew, like, I don't know, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I knew, like, I was just preparing myself for the shit show.
Yeah.
And he had, like, one good year after that, I think, while we were married.
Wow.
I remember going through his medical records that you provided for me to look through, and he actually did have, like, some pretty, I mean, relatively speaking, he did have some physical health issues.
Yeah.
I think with one of his legs. I think he did have some eye issues. And then he had psychological issues, and I found a piece of paperwork where he had gone to a psychologist, an Army psychologist, and reported feelings of paranoia that, like, people were following him around the commissary, the cars would get too close to him, feel that they're following him, that they're tracking him. and he went and self-reported that. From as his spouse, I mean, what did you see when he came back from that deployment?
You know, it's interesting because I had this entree to Army medicine that a lot of spouses don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to kind of shake some cages or rattle some cages and shake trees to get, you know, diagnoses into his medical record without being doubted.
Mm-hmm.
And there came a point, I think we were back at Bragg in like 2011 or 12, I think, where he was so bad. It was like just breakdowns every day. And, you know, he would not go see anybody because of his clearance, right? And his training.
Right.
And I'm like, listen, man, that they will not pull your clearance for this. And he's like, yes, they will. And I pulled in almost every favor that I'd, you know, gathered within the last 8 or 9 years. And I finally got a command psychiatrist, who's a great guy, not going to name him, but he said, I will see Michael off the books. I will prescribe anything that you need. You know, you pay cash for it, whatever. It won't go into the system. You know, anything that he needs, I'll get it done. And Michael still wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Because if he was polygraphed for something sensitive,
Right.
or, I mean, you know, like the answers that he would have to give,
Right.
he didn't want to be dishonest. And I'm just, like throwing up my hands, like, I can't. Like, what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
With all of my training and background, I couldn't help him.
Right.
So I'm thinking, what are these other spouses and families going through? It's got to be as bad or worse than what I'm going through, because they have no idea
Right.
what's happening to this person that they love, that they've been with, they've moved with, they've PCS'd with, like, what's going on?
Can you sort of give us just kind of a boilerplate of sort of what his personality or what he was like prior to the blast or prior to the event, and then sort of what you started noticing or what happened, whether it was over time or suddenly post-blast?
Like, I mean, no offense, but I mean, you guys are tough. I mean, it's not like, you know, you're not snowflakes or cornflakes at all. So I mean, that was still there, right? Like,
Yeah.
You know, the dark humor, the saltiness, you know, just that kind of, you know what I'm talking about, like that kind of vibe, right? But he was mean. He just got really mean.
And he had never really, he had never been.
No,
like, mean.
I mean, like sarcastic, fun. I mean, he was really, really funny and always was, but like mean and dark and suspicious, and just this general like malaise of just not feeling well. You know, headaches, trouble sleeping. You know, sleep just became this like precious commodity, and God forbid any of the kids made noise or I checked my phone and woke him up. I mean, he was terrified of not being able to sleep. And I think the year before he, you know, got a certain higher level of security clearance, he actually was on antidepressants for, I think, a year in 2009. That was the best year. Like, he was just sailing. He was doing much better. Mm-hmm. And then he went off of them because he had to go into a selection phase for some unnamed whatever unit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it was just like watching somebody disintegrate before your eyes. And eventually, we had a marriage counselor who used to be a ranger, lovely guy in Fayetteville. And he asked for a private appointment with me. He's like, you got to walk. Like, you're going to have to walk. And I mean, I'm Catholic. I've talked to my priest, and my priest was like, this isn't marriage. Like, you can't, you just can't. Like, you're going to have to walk. So I did.
I mean, nobody can fault you for that. Like,
Yeah.
there's also an element of self-preservation, and not just physically, and I don't know if that was the thing, but just mentally too.
No, physically, I was safe, yeah.
Yeah, but just mentally, like, you know, you can't hang on to a drowning person, you know, without.
And that was the metaphor that I used. I'm like, it was like he was pushing me under just to like come up for air.
Yeah.
And there's so many spouses and family members who have that happening.
Yeah.
Where, you know, they are absolutely trying to keep their service member afloat, keep the career intact. And when you look at the divorce rate, you know, in the military, it's just like so tacitly accepted, right?
Right.
But when you look at the divorce rate in special operations, you can almost use like marital disintegration as like a huge flag. Not because it's abnormal, but because when the family goes and the wife finally says, or the spouse finally says, I'm out, they've put up with so much and tried so hard.
Right.
I think that's really almost like a diagnostic tool to say
Right.
this person's probably close to suicide.
Right.
You know, and instead we just accept that, oh, marriages disintegrate because it's a hard life. Speaking as a former spouse, we're pretty fucking tough.
Yeah.
Like, we can handle a lot.
Yeah.
You guys disappear for months.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know where you are, what you're doing. Like, we can hang. Like, there's a lot that we can put up with. So when we finally say done,
Right.
that service member is seriously screwed up.
Right.
And command and the military is just like, oh, another divorce.
And I imagine it's very hard as a spouse too, because, you know, when you've got a family, I mean, not only for all the reasons that divorce is tough, but in a way you're responsible for this, or you're not responsible for them, but you may feel responsible for them, and it's like, well, if I go and I take the kids, like, then what do they have left? But you can't that's not on you, and you can't get caught up in that.
Yeah.
You know.
I think a lot of spouses, myself included, we protect their careers, like rigorously protect their careers. And we're hyper vigilant about not screwing them over career wise.
Right.
I mean, Michael did some really stupid stuff when I was divorcing him, and I really just kind of protected him from that because I didn't want his career to disintegrate.
It's, I mean, it's funny, not funny, but I mean, maybe darkly funny in retrospect, but I think, you know, like when you're in special operations, the narrative is always like, oh, this fucking woman, she's fucking around on him, she's ruining his life, she's ruining his career. And I mean, I've worked as a journalist and I've talked to enough military spouses over the years that I realize there is very much two sides to that story.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because there's a chicken and the egg kind of aspect to this. I mean, is it because they're dealing with these post-traumatic stress issues and TBI issues? But I mean, these guys are putting these women through hell too a lot of times, and that's why you're seeing the marriage disintegrate. That's why you're seeing that, you know, this guy was already heading down a very dark road, and that's why his marriage disintegrated. It's not that it disintegrated,
and then he went.
It's
down,
not that he's
right.
going down this dark road because his wife left him.
Right.
Like, and just anecdotally, on outside looking in, I would just note that I think I've seen several times when there is a perception from the soldier that their career is going to shit and their marriage has gone to shit. That, like you said, is a diagnostic, and when you see that, should be like a huge red flag.
Well, and a lot of the suicides and special operations, and I can find you the number, but it eludes me at the moment, within 6 months of separation from their team or pending discipline, that's when they die. When they're under investigation, you know, for whatever, you know, just...
I'll get into that a little bit later in the story.
But yeah, when they lose that family structure...
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
In talking about sort of the final separation, do those suicides go up even more after they leave service, even if they left after retirement?
I don't know.
Okay.
We're not good at tracking that. And the
Yeah.
VA doesn't delineate suicides by... They do it by branch, but they don't do it by MOS or specialty. At least not... I haven't been able to dive into it.
I think if you were to dive into that, people would be shocked.
I think you would,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think they would be shocked.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, I know that I've read that a lot of special operations veterans have cardiac issues that eventually kill them very shortly after retirement. I mean, there's actually like changes to the cardiac axis and electrophysiology of the heart, just from the stress and the circulating catecholamines and all this other stuff.
Is that related to CAD?
Coronary artery disease?
Yeah.
It might be, but also like, you are highly structured personnel. You wake up, you do PT, you do all this stuff. When either, the military structure or the family structure is gone,
Right.
you're rudderless.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of psychache, a lot of angst.
Yeah.
And that can also precipitate suicide as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's multifactorial.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult to drill down into it, but that's what science is. Like, you have to start studying it somewhere.
Right. Right.
So
Now, Michael if he was already having these issues before interviewing for other units, I mean, those selection processes are not nothing.
Oh, they're insane.
So he must have been very high performing and able
that's what's fascinating
and able to like hide that from them.
Well, when I had the briefing in 2020, and I was actually here in New York, and I did it over Zoom with whatever clandestine unit they were calling themselves, kind of like 20 minutes into it, and you have the video of it. I was like, can we just stop this shit right now? Can you just stop? Because this is literally like my lane. This is literally my research, is like why these guys commit suicide. And I said, your selection process is second to none. It's one of the hardest in the world for any agency anywhere.
Yeah.
And you have all of the paperwork that I'm looking at, and none of this jumped out at you. This is like, for me, this is like looking at a train coming down the tracks with the sirens going and the horn going and the lights going, and you were just okay with this? And they just didn't have an answer, you know? Like,
yeah, just the medical records you provided to me.
Just the medical records alone. But yeah, I mean, Michael was extremely high performing. He was very good at what he did. And they did conclude in the 15-6 into his death that he had a great persona. And he did. He was able to just put this front up that...
It's that while his personal life was disintegrating,
right?
Yeah.
That professionally he was just moving up and up and up,
right?
And he transferred from infantry to human intelligence, became a humanter, and I showed his ERB to people in the field, and they were like, "This guy was like a machine,
right?
Like he went to every qualification course. This dude was like in line to essentially like retire as an Army humanter and probably go work for the CIA for another 20 years, like." It was just an amazing trajectory that he had. And then I believe he received some cross-training, like cyber warfare stuff, and was like learning computer coding.
Oh, he was a great hacker.
I mean, he had he must have had a probably close to like a genius level IQ.
He was hella smart.
Yeah,
really smart. And that was my other question to the colonel and the lawyer from the NSA who was sitting in this debriefing with me after their investigation. And I said, these are all professional liars. You teach them how to lie, and they're really good at it.
Right.
They're gray men.
Right.
They are absolutely 100% excellent at subterfuge and pulling one over on you. That's their job. And you're telling me that you don't have any way to mitigate that kind of bias in your evaluations?
Yeah. I mean...
Like... How dumb is that? How dumb is that? That is just baffles me.
I think probably, not knowing, but I think probably one of the challenges, if you think of these organizations that are hiring at this point in time, everybody they're looking at has been in combat.
Yeah.
They all have been in combat. They all probably have some form of TBI.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of them. And so it's sort of like, I mean, we can look at his records and say, oh, look, like this, like you said, like this is a train going off the rails. But you can probably, people don't start out in units like that. They've been other places, and they've done something to earn a spot or earn the, the sort of recognition.
Recognition?
Yeah, recognition from an organization like that. And so at this late stage in the game, everybody's seen combat. They're like, well, if we don't take somebody like this, who would we take?
Okay, so they are pulling from like a participant pool that has like the same kind of issues. But here's where it's different. And, I don't want to sound like, I don't want to like insert any like woo or like voodoo into this, but I remember one day in February of 2019, I mean, Michael was really never happy that I left. Let's just put it that mildly, like not happy with me. But so communications were pretty fraught. So I was not, predisposed to reaching out to him and being like, hey, how you doing? But there was one day in February where I was like, oh, this is, I'm like, I finally texted him and I said, in February 2019, I said, I felt all day like I did the day that the EFP went off underneath your seat. Like, I know something's wrong. Are you okay? And he said, I'm not, but I can't talk about it. And I was like, okay, well, if it gets dark, if it gets deep, call me. And that was when, in his records, that same day, when he finally went to behavioral health because he was not doing well. So Michael had a 4-month almost lead up or more than 4 month lead up of severe symptoms before he killed himself. And so that's where the negligence comes in.
Right.
That's where,
Right.
such like, this is a unit with more money than God. They
Right.
have everything at their disposal. Anything that these guys or women need, they get.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew it. They noticed it. And they just did not intervene.
They didn't intervene.
Before we get there, I do want to hit you on a few interesting points, I think. And I mentioned just recently on this podcast about the Extortion 17 crash and how that affected so many people in the special ops community. I was wondering if you could tell the story about how Michael intersected with that story.
Yeah, so it was 2011.
Yeah.
God knows where he was, right? But he really good about calling me, talking to the girls, and he called me, and something was up. And nothing in the news had really hit yet. And I'm like, what is wrong? Like, what's going on? And he couldn't say. Like, he couldn't tell me where he was. He couldn't tell me what he was doing. And he said, call this person, a friend of ours, who had been in Ranger Bat and kind of in the same line of work, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay. So I pick up and I called him, and he said, it hasn't hit the news yet, but let's just say that Mike's office is really empty right now. Could you elaborate? He's like, well, his office was full yesterday, mm-hmm. and now it's empty. Mm-hmm. And so Mike woke up or went into work, and almost everybody that he'd been working with is now dead. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And then that came out in the news. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I don't even know how to wrap my brain around that.
Right.
Can you imagine? Well,
he was doing human support to Dev Group at that time.
Yeah. I mean, you would know better than I.
And jacking steel in the gym with those dudes, and then he comes into work the next day, and all these dudes are just not there.
Vaporized. Yeah. Done. Gone. Yeah. And he was a lot different after that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to. I only realize it in retrospect. Also, in talking to people and interviewing people, and I did that story about Bill Mulder also, who was a Dev Group operator. Was having real problems already, and said he needed a break. Went down to Texas on a recruiting job, and then Extortion 17 happened. All of his friends were dead, and him and his wife were both like, "We have to go back." Mm-hmm. So they went back to Dam Neck, and he didn't get better. He got worse. Mm-hmm. And again, the family unit disintegrated. Yeah. He left the family. They had a bunch of kids together. And then he got on a FaceTime call with the girls one day with the kids, and the wife took the phone because he was scaring them, and he shot himself on a FaceTime call with his wife. And I'll try to bring this back up at the end of this, but his wife, his widow, and his brother-in-law, who's a former CIA officer, set up this app called Sound Off. And it's designed for people like Michael. Michael is like the guy. He could be the prototype of the person who would be helped by this app. People who are afraid they're going to lose their security clearance, people who are afraid they're going to face professional repercussions, can get on this app and talk to clinicians who have some sort of background in special operations. I talked to one of them. I know who the people are behind this company. Like, they're for real. Mm-hmm. And somebody in the community who's having these problems can get on this app and talk to a clinician anonymously.
Good.
Completely anonymously. And if the person wants to, they can then take it the next step and meet in person with a clinician. And the military, the intelligence community, the CIA, wherever you work, is not going to know about this. So it's just a way to try to get that help to people exactly like Michael, people exactly in that situation, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, they didn't have embedded psychiatry or psychology in Michael's unit.
That's amazing.
These people have to lose their identities and pretend to be somebody else, and then come home and pretend to be who they are again.
Right.
And you don't have them. Well, they're not embedded because they don't have the knowledge of the trade craft or the requisite security clearances. And I'm thinking, right. So send them. So give them the training. So get them the clearances.
Read them on, yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
And, nope.
And so the next step for Michael, as I understand it, was he did some intel support for Third Group.
Yeah.
Went on a secret mission to Chad, doing a sort of reconnaissance with those dudes. That was like 2015, if I recall correctly.
2015, 2016, yeah.
And then he went into the Great Skills Program.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, he definitely did.
Maybe that's like my spouse training kicking in. Like, I can't say that name.
Yeah.
Well, Great Skills is all that is. It's like a non-traditional career path for humaniters, and they go into all these sorts of clandestine units and programs within the military. And so Michael went into that. That was his ambition, right?
Right, but still, my knee-jerk reaction is I don't know nothing about nothing. I'm not
I
going
think
to say that out loud.
You can actually, yeah. There's some stuff released, and Michael then made it into the unit. Their non-classified name is Comtech.
Yeah.
Was it Communications Technology Activities or something down on Belvoir?
Well, we were at Bragg. We were at Charlie Mike's pub on Riley Road, and they have all the ceiling tiles painted with the different unit insignias. And I pointed at one. I'm like, "Oh, I know what that is." And Mike's like, "No, you don't." He's like, "No, you don't." I mean, so yeah. I knew where he was working, but it was kind of tongue in cheek. Like, no, living near Fort Meade, are you? But not really living in Fort Meade. Yeah.
What do you do? Logs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm an ethical hacker. Sure you are, bud.
So Michael got married again.
He did. Yeah.
Divorced again.
Yeah. Sadly. She seemed like a nice lady too. That's sad.
Do you recall about how long that marriage was?
Oh God, it was pretty kind of rocky.
Yeah,
and then
like a year maybe.
I think they were together like 3 or 4 years, married for 1.5, and then
yeah.
And
then that fell apart in
2018 because he called me in May of 2018 to tell me that they had gone their separate ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to go into like all of these details about Michael's life, and like I really went into all of them when I wrote this article. There's an issue in his unit where he had a relationship with a woman in the unit, which she had an affair on him, while he was having an affair on his wife.
Yeah.
And then she was having an affair on him with a married officer in the unit. There's a lot of melodrama that took place during that time frame. And according to the letter that Michael wrote, he believed that this woman in their unit reported him as an insider threat in retaliation for her belief that he reported her for fraternization in the unit with a married man, which I have no idea if that's actually true.
It
could be part of
that's not his style, so I don't think so. I mean, for all of his faults, Michael really, really loved me, and I think he really, really loved his second wife. So it doesn't track, right?
Right.
I think that's the paranoia kicking in.
And that was in his mind the rationale for what he believed there were surveillance teams following him around Washington, D.C.
Well, when did the paranoia start much earlier than that?
He had like fits and starts of it, and that I was usually able to like kick it. Like, are you serious, dude? Like, nobody's following us.
Right.
Get some sleep. Like, you're fine. Nobody's following us. But then, they call it like the MI shakes, where they're just so attuned to being suspicious of everybody, everything.
Right.
I mean, there would be points where, like, I'd come back from Target. Like, were you really at Target? Yeah, dude, you want to see the receipt? Because I don't go to Target without dropping, like, $300.
Right.
Like, trust me, I was at Target. Well, what do you do? And then at that point, too, I was working with some special operations, medical personnel on research and initiatives and that kind of thing. And so I was around men who actually really respected that I was married, but that was not
right.
I mean, that like increased the paranoia as well. So yeah, I think it was just the paranoia really kicking in.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that kind of like that last like 6 months where things really went downhill, and that paranoia did kick in.
Yeah.
And Michael he got deployed to Vietnam, again, sort of like a recon prior to President.
Well, he entered Vietnam. He entered through Vietnam. What he did after that is up for debate.
True. We have photos of him in Vietnam.
Well,
cruising around.
Vietnam's really close to a lot of other countries that we're interested in that area.
Yeah, so. and this was just prior to President Trump's meeting the summit with the North Koreans in Vietnam. came back from that deployment, and it seems like that's when things really started to slide downhill for him.
Yeah.
From your point of view, what were you seeing?
It's interesting. All I could really see on my side was that he just wasn't showing up for his kids. Mm-hmm. And so, being a normal ex-wife, you're like, well, what a deadbeat, like not seeing your kids, and just thinking, okay, well, he's a jerk. But in hindsight, in retrospect, realizing now, oh, okay, he really could not engage with anybody at that point.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think that was part of it too. I mean, I was teaching at the University of Tennessee, and I drove the girls from Tennessee to DC actually. So that's a hike, so that he could spend a weekend with them. Because I'm like, well, I'll be fucked if, he's not going to see his kids. Like,
right.
I don't give a shit what the excuse is. I'll drive him up to see him.
Right.
And that was the summer of 2018. He saw him Christmas of 2018, and then I don't think he saw them again before he died. He was actually supposed to see them. Like, he died like 2 or 3 days before they were going to spend some weeks with him that summer.
From the paperwork I looked through and the interviews I did with various people, I mean, some of the things that he had going on down there in the Washington, D.C. area, he thought there were surveillance teams following him around wherever he went. He was writing down license plates of people, cars outside his home.
Oh, I got his phone after he died. The photo roll is full
of
license plates and cars.
Well, I mean, the challenge is, even if you're just doing training, if you're out on a surveillance exercise, like SDR and stuff like that, if you, it's easy. It is the way people look at you that you would never notice before. You're like, oh, they're following me, only because you're doing honest surveillance. Like, it is easy to start getting it in your head that everybody's looking.
Here's an interesting detail, Dave, about that is that in the records and what I found that I think speaks to Michael becoming increasingly irrational was what he was doing when he thought people were following him. He was doing things like pulling a wild U-turn, getting up behind them, jumping out of his car, and taking pictures of them, which is the exact opposite of how we train people to do surveillance
detection. But who said he was doing that?
He did.
Oh, okay.
He did. He told a coworker about that. He's like, I want them to know that I'm trained.
Yeah, he was going into
He was
provocative. He was going provocative, which you should never do.
Yeah, so he was impaired to the point where he was not using his training.
There was another document somewhere I was reading about how a coworker from work came to check on him, and he was unscrewing all the light bulbs in the house because he thought there were surveillance
Which is
devices.
bizarre. Like, that's not how they would surveil him. Light bulbs, really?
Yeah.
Like, is it 1940?
It speaks to the irrationality.
That's what I'm saying.
He's showing the behaviors not of a trained professional, intelligence professional, but rather something more akin to schizophrenia.
Well, that's exactly it. He was starting to show schizoaffective symptoms. And that's what really pisses me off, is that he would be at work and reading the reports and then talking to his coworkers after he died, or even while he was in ICU. I'm thinking he was starting to not be able to recognize faces.
People he worked
with.
Right.
And command's just like, okay, well, go home and get some rest. Are you fucking kidding me?
Right.
And then, let's see, a few months before he died, he wrote that letter to his command sergeant major, requesting to be taken off mission.
Oof,
And I read that letter, and it is a non-clinical term. It's the ravings of a madman. This is really serious.
Yeah. So you have this high-speed, highly sought after, highly trained, workhorse, best of the best. And then you're seeing him disintegrate, and your thought as a commander or as a sergeant major is just like, oh, well, you're going on leave, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Seriously. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It boggles the mind.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say that the 15-6 investigation I read was a check the block.
Oh, it was
bullshit.
It was mess. I'm glad they redacted the name of the person who did it, because I'd be like, were you born yesterday?
Yeah.
Have you ever been in the military?
Yeah.
It was awful. They didn't even get his family tree right. And the thing is, they didn't interview me. They didn't interview his second ex-wife. They didn't ask anybody with working knowledge of this guy's...
They wanted it to go away.
They really did. And and I don't want to, I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist in the midst of talking about all of this clandestine stuff.
Right.
Why'd you want it to go away so bad?
Right.
Because the last thing they want is somebody like me picking away and peeling
Or
away
me.
at it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
talking about the unit and what they do.
Like, honestly, I felt kind of bad for them. Like, oh, you done fucked up. And oh, by the way, you fucked up. And the first wife of the guy who died has a literal PhD in this shit.
Right.
I hope you were losing sleep at night.
Right.
Because I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
Honestly. This is such bullshit.
So what steps did you take? Like how did you manage it with your knowledge, your background, and your connections?
Oh, sorry. The AC's really low right now.
Yeah, can we? Oh, yeah.
What is it, like 104 degrees in New York City?
Yeah, it's like that.
It's sweltering.
Yeah.
It's so bad. My hair was done before I got here. Say again. Ask me again.
So with your connections in that community, with your background, your education,
Yeah.
like how did you manage that? Because you had a lot more resources and a lot more knowledge than a typical spouse
Right.
would have.
Oh God. It's weird because he died like 6 months before COVID hit, right? So not only did like a pandemic just completely shatter, any kind of ability to really get anything done, but like, I don't know, where do you start? Like, hey, my ex-husband died and he's part of this unit that has no name.
Right.
Who do you call?
Right.
I call Jack.
Right.
Because you had interviewed me about TBI, about the breaching thing,
Yeah.
right? And then just like, through happenstance, we started talking about Mike and his TBI. So, the Army wasn't listening, that's for damn sure. And so, being a former DA civilian, a military spouse, I figured, well, the military is afraid of two things, lawsuits and press. So I started talking to the press. And I was in Canada. I'd moved there after Mike died with my kids. So it was when Trump made those stupid comments about
In Baghdad.
Yeah.
Or Al-Assad.
like, oh, they're just headaches. Oh, really? Let me tell you what it's like to have somebody with just a headache. Let me tell you what it's like to be married to somebody who just has like a headache. And that was terrifying. Like, I was not like a media hound. I really didn't want the attention. I literally moved to Canada to just like live a quiet life after my children's father killed himself. Like, I just wanted no attention. But there's families out there who know that it's not just a headache. And then after talking to that reporter and realizing like, oh, okay, this starts to shake some trees. Okay. And so, you're the fifth estate.
I think the fourth.
You're
Or fifth column.
The fifth
depending
column,
on-
yeah.
Fourth
Depending
estate.
on
Yeah,
your
you're the
column.
fifth column. Fourth estate and fifth column.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's, that's why journalism and a free press is so important, because that's the check and balance.
Right.
So if the Army's not going to listen to me, Jack will.
Right.
The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation did.
Right.
CTV, like all these other outlets did.
So just a few things to touch on before getting to that point.
Yeah.
The Michael out on a smoke break articulated his death plan to a coworker
Right.
a few days prior.
I mean, like really specifically.
Very specifically. He said exactly he named the parking garage
Yeah.
and said this is where I would jump from.
Yeah.
The colleague, I'm sure, feels horrible to this day. Meant to report it, but didn't report it. And then what did we have? The day of, he was about to go on leave and
The
take
girls
the
were
two
supposed to go
girls.
up and see him.
And he drove his pickup truck up to the parking garage, smoked a couple cigarettes. I believe he left his cell phone inside the vehicle, and then he threw himself off the parking garage. Massive head wounds.
Yeah.
And that was, you got an email from Michael that day,
On
correct?
Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, thank God I was like 10-year track, because you're terrified to miss an email. And I was checking emails on a Sunday. And I got this email. I'm like, this is bizarre. It's like, I'm being followed. I went to see behavioral health, but it was actually the CIA. And I can't sue the U.S. government, but you can. And I picked up the phone and called his mom. And they didn't know anything, but they got a call from the police, and they were on their way from North Carolina, from Sanford, near Bragg, from North Carolina to Maryland. And so nobody knew anything, right? They had just gotten a call, like, start driving. Okay. And I think maybe it was his girlfriend who called them.
He left a death note for the girlfriend, which I read, completely off the wall.
Oh, it was that was bizarre too. And so, I'm thinking like, okay, if he was severely injured and he was in Maryland, where would they fly him? Like, where would they take him? So I called Kelly Shock Trauma, and I called their like charge nurse line, and the nurse mafia taking care of their own. I said, hey, here's the deal. I don't know what the hell's going on. Do you have a guy in your trauma base named Michael Froede? And she's like, yes, I do. And I said, okay, I'm going to need a full report. And it was ominous. So that's how that went down.
And so you went down there with the family, and
I drove really fast. Yeah.
And Michael was eventually taken off life support. He was not going to make it.
He was not going to make it. He was in neuro trauma ICU. I got there about 11-ish, and his mother and brother were just spent. They went to the hotel, and I went to the hotel, and then it's kind of like Jurassic Park, like when the kids were in the car and they're like, we left him? We left him? And I remember I got out of the shower and I'm like just dripping, and I'm like, he's alone? And I got dressed and went back. And then I spent the last night that he was alive with him. Gave him a bath, talked to him, played some Mitch Hedberg. So like just stupid shit that, we used to just really enjoy. And just talked to him. And then they took him to the OR in the morning to get his organs.
How did his unit respond to all of this?
It was really weird because, like, when I walked into the room, into his ICU room, after, I don't know, 10 years of working with operators or medical guys or 18 Delta types and that kind of thing, I walked in and I'm like, these are not door kickers. I'm like, this is odd. And I understand now that they were more intel kind of geeky tech types, which is fine. But they didn't seem to have the same kind of grasp of the situation where, like, if I'd walked into like an ODA,
right?
Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
so the peer support wasn't quite there in the same way that it would be in a team.
They just seemed dumbfounded, and I'm thinking, who are you people? Like, what?
They
what the
hire
hell's
these
going
like
on?
virgins on these units to be like intel dweebs and stuff like that. I
Well, I don't want to call them dweebs. I mean,
that's
they
what-
go through a
yeah,
lot of
that's-
training. Like, they're very smart people.
Yeah,
man.
I think that a lot of it,
But
more
they're socially stunted a lot of
well,
times.
I don't. I mean,
I don't know if
I don't
that's
know
fair.
that. I don't know about that. It's just.
I mean,
that
I'm a nerd. Like,
they work. I think part of it is they work more on an individual basis, and they might do trips in pairs or whatever. But I think that generally, like, you don't have the same
Team mentality.
the same cohesive
well,
type of.
and that's the thing too. Sorry, I interrupted.
No,
you.
please.
So if you think about it, and I'm not trying to like, any trade secrets, but you think about insulate versus isolate, right?
Right.
And I'm not saying they had any role in his death or that they could have prevented anything, but when you think about the cohesion and why guys in special operations are dying, they die by suicide when they're separated from their
Right.
team, when they're being when they're under suspicion or being disciplined or how they're somehow othered, right?
Right.
And that really contravenes this insulate versus isolate mentality. And so it's almost like I would conjecture that Michael was isolated.
Okay.
Instead of pulling him back into the fold.
Right.
And saying, buddy, we know you're hurting. We know
Right.
something's going on. We got you.
Right.
It's like, oh, what's going on here? And that makes it worse.
Right.
He wrote that he felt ostracized by his
For
peers.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And he was pending discipline. He was under investigation for God knows what. For having an affair. Like, who the fuck has not had an affair, right?
Right.
So I think they were just really stunned.
Right.
Right? Because they maybe hadn't seen operational guys go downhill. I don't know.
A few addendums to all of this. A month after Michael took his life, you had a guy in TFO, in Task Force Orange, a secretive Jsoc intelligence unit, took his own life.
I know what TFO is.
I know you do.
Okay.
Not all the people out there
Sorry.
may not. And then a month after that, a second operator in the unit took his own life.
Well, and the sergeant major in Mike's unit, and then the commanding general.
Sitting on top of Army intelligence, of course, is Intelligence Command. The CSM of Intelligence Command was under investigation for, I think, technically sexual assault While intoxicated at a party in Japan, he like slapped a female soldier on the ass. So not like a totally irredeemable person, but he made a mistake and was under investigation for it. And he decided to take his own life. And then the commander of MScN, who would have overseen the investigation into Michael's death and into his own sergeant major's death.
He did oversee the investigation into Michael's death.
Yes, because we have the paperwork with his name on it.
Yes, we do.
And after he retired, he went out, as I understand it, went out for dinner with some other retired officers, totally normal day, and then went home and killed himself. Mm-hmm. So if you were to dig a little deeper into MScN has a constellation of different units, kind of scattered and around a few different places in the United States and Oconus. They have a real problem with suicides and even some murders. But my comment about, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's true that in MScN, and I had a conversation with some people in MScN about this, they have some very immature personalities. They're people who are maybe like a little bit on the spectrum, people who are not socialized properly. And again, this is anecdotal. This isn't based on any sort of clinical trial, probably because no such thing exists, right?
Not in the military. God forbid we investigate something, right?
Right. So they've had a series of problems with this. And there are other issues in intelligence command that I haven't really written about or talked about. Like one thing that I was told about was how they have a lot of young dudes doing document exploitation, is what we'd call it. And through that job, they are unfortunately exposed to a lot of child pornography all the time. And that stuff, as law enforcement organizations understand, you have to cycle the police officers.
Right.
Because it fucks with them.
Right.
And they don't, as I understand it, have not done that in MScN, and it's leading to psychological issues in some of their soldiers. So there, I mean, there's a strong case to be made that IG needs to go in and turn the place upside down.
Yeah.
But as a friend of mine once remarked, how far does an IG investigation go inside a special access program? Not very far at all.
Right.
So there is definitely a case to be made for reform, and Michael's story is one part of a much larger problem that exists.
Well, okay, so speaking as somebody who's like diagnostically on the spectrum, I mean, it doesn't predispose you to being immature or suicidal. What it does do is it can isolate you socially.
Right.
So you may, like, you put me in a cocktail party that's like a nightmare hellscape. You put me into a unit of people, like socially navigate that is atrocious. And in the military, a lot of your career rests on your social acumen, right? So that's probably part of it too.
We've talked about it with SOF a little bit, that they're looking for people who are a little bit outside the norm, right? But now is the CIA, I think, is deliberately making an attempt now, not saying that anyone's wrong, to hire people who are more neurodivergent.
The FBI is as well, because
they use
our
now.
pattern recognition is outstanding.
Right.
You need to do these increasingly technical jobs.
Yep.
You need people who are not quote unquote normal, right? But now you have people who are abnormal. How do you compensate for that? How do you deal with that? How do you treat those people?
Well, the thing is, like, being on the spectrum, being neurodiverse, or anything like that, it's not a behavioral issue. It's a processing difference,
it may
right?
predispose the person to certain things, the way soft personalities are predisposed towards risk-taking behaviors, shall we say.
I mean, but I mean, and you can speak to this more than me, but I don't think that it predisposes. I think that it has to do with but also it's not that, like, if somebody is somewhere on the spectrum and has like social anxiety or not as much, like if they're not an extrovert or whatever, and they don't deal with that doesn't bother them. Like that's not like it's just a normal thing. I'd prefer not to be around.
Well, and if you look at like guys from Delta, like they're just a big bunch of nerds,
right?
Most of them,
yeah.
Like you look at them, you're like, oh, yeah, you don't really look like Rambo. But fortunately, they don't. Like you need that kind of diversity of perspective and processing, right?
And like when we talk about normal, I mean, I don't think there really is any normal. I mean, we were talking about kind of soft people earlier, and And I remember when I took the MMPI, to go to SODIC and stuff, and I was joking around with the doc. It's like, did I pass? And he goes, you did exactly what we were expecting. And I was like, well, what do you mean what you're expecting? And he said, you have an ego, you have sociopathic tendencies, but you're not a sociopath. That you have the ability to compartmentalize. He goes, honestly, he goes, we see this massive sort of convergence, like test results between special ops people and the criminal population. We just don't know why one goes one way, the other goes the other way, but they have, similar mentalities about stuff. So, like, we're not normal, but I don't think that anybody is really like there's a real
right.
norm.
But my point is, like, they're intentionally recruiting people who have a certain set of, like, personality behaviors, and whatever those personality behaviors are, I mean, it comes with some baggage as well. You think about the special forces guys who their dick gets them in trouble on 6 continents, and drinking and everything else like that. It all kind of seems to go hand in hand.
I mean, I would argue that it sort of starts at they're not like getting personality behaviors. They are getting people that are capable of performing a job, whether that's cyber warfare, communications, special operations. Like, they want people who are good at that job. The people who happen to be good at those jobs often are, like you say, if people on the spectrum, they're better at pattern recognition. They're better at, like, sitting down and focusing on something for a while. You look at an executive or like a CEO, there are, the things that makes a person a good salesperson or a good CEO is, like, they can't, like, stop doing those things when they're not doing their job.
Well, I mean, you look at it,
what I mean.
like in my line of work, how can I resuscitate a dying baby?
Right.
Because I'm able to suspend emotion.
Exactly.
Because I'm able to focus on the task at
hand.
How did I, and of course I would have to do like years of further research, but how did I come up with a theoretical model as to why these guys are dying? What are the 3 main reasons? It's because, I'm game to immerse myself in tons of research and my own research, and to just like marinate it until a pattern emerges. So, you need those kind of aberrant, untoward, weird kind of people to do it, right?
Right.
And maybe I was just the right person and the right ex-spouse at the right time, because I did live it. I mean, when Michael was in the ICU, I was emailing my PhD advisor and saying, hey, funny story.
Right.
The research that I'm doing on suicide and special operations, well, currently I'm sitting beside the ICU bed of my ex-husband who's in special operations, and he just tried to kill himself. So, and they, them all being like normal, fairly neurotypical people, they really thought they were going to lose me, that I was just going to quit.
Right.
And instead I'm like doubling down.
Right.
I'm like, well, this shit just hit home.
Right.
This is really real now.
Right.
And so if it's okay, I'll tell you, like,
please.
This is what came out of the research that I did.
Yeah.
Which was actually hard to do after Michael died, because it's like any PhD that you're doing, you're staring at this stuff. You live and breathe it. And then I've got like 2 little girls who are traumatized, and I'm like, oh, okay, I have to finish this. So this is what I found after interviewing guys in SOF, Delta, SEALs, and all this secret shit where half of my study population was like, can't really tell you what unit I'm in, which is fine. So they were all male, and they'd all been in SOF for over 10 years. Some of them had been in for decades. And this is what I found. All of you are high performers, obviously, right? So when you have a high-performing and self-concealing and perfectionistic traits, those 3 things, and that's supported by others' research, and that triad seems to precipitate suicide in SOF. So yes, you all are high performers, and you are really great at not telling people what's going on. And so high performers, self-concealers, and perfectionistic, you are the best of the best, obviously, right? And I see this in students, and in students in my program. I see this, now I see it everywhere. Who are the people who are most likely to just flip a switch and take their own lives?
Right.
And I'm not talking about people with, severe psychiatric issues or, like complex trauma or that kind of thing. Who are the people that you never expect to die by suicide?
Right.
And it's the people who have those 3 characteristics. And to my knowledge, that is not something that the military has identified.
Right.
The military, and SOCOM especially, they have this habit of othering. Well, that's not who we are. That person who was suicidal or died by suicide, well, they had marital problems and they had financial problems
Right.
and they had alcohol problems and they had this problem, that problem. Those are indicators.
Right.
Those are indicators that this high-performing professional is going downhill fast.
Right.
And it's so easy to marginalize and make that person an other.
Right. There was a reason that they did that.
Yes, they're not like us.
Yeah.
They had all these problems. They're just, an aberrant finding. And, the rest of us are just this,
We're alphas.
We're alphas and we're
Right.
totally put together and,
Right.
never late on a bill and we don't buy trucks with a 20% APR and all
Right.
that shit, right?
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't do that.
Right.
We're good Christian white guys who
Yeah.
go home to their wives no, you're not. Like, let's be honest. So, when you see these, normal, well-performing people who start to slide, they're not sowing their oats. They are probably close to killing themselves.
It's a cry for help.
It is
Yeah.
a cry for help. And almost a year to the day after Mike died. So, you had a traditional route to SF. I don't know your route because I just met you.
My route, was pretty traditional.
So like you're in the infantry, or you do whatever. You go to airborne, you go to selection, you do the Q course, right? And then early 2000s, you have all these guys going through as 18 X-rays, right? So for lack of a better term, I'll call it a chalk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Mike's alphabetical chalk from A to F. So say there's 8 guys. I think half of them are dead now from suicide. And one of the most put together, like, through all of our, marriages, divorces, lives, whatever, like when Mike called me to tell me he was getting divorced for the second time, I was in San Francisco at an 18 Deltas med school graduation that, we were really close to. So all these guys that started out as like baby 18 X-rays together, in 2021, the most stable family man, put together, whatever, Chris Baker killed himself in California. And I just spent, months in New York running the COVID hospital at Columbia with Jeff Eberhardt, also an 18 Delta, also did SOPSI with Mike. Jonathan Brandon was an 18 Delta. He's the physician whose med school graduation I was at when Mike called me about his divorce. So, all of these, like, these intertwining lives that started together in 2004, 2005, Mike and Chris are dead. Mm-hmm. And Chris Baker, without going into details because I don't want to, insult his family, he was an 18 Delta and he knew how to make sure that he was not going to survive his injuries.
Right.
And, I get a phone call saying, Chris Baker drove to a parking garage and I'm just like, oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Like, if the most put together, nuclear family kind of, something's up. Mm-hmm. Something's up, and one dissertation can't solve it.
Right.
I can't. And there's we need a team of scientists to really look into that.
I honest to God have never done it because I don't have the heart to do it at this point. But my company in Ranger Battalion, the amount of guys who are not here anymore who died unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. It's too horrifying to even really sit down and start writing the names out and figuring out how many. It's a lot.
From what we know right now, from what you know and what your research and other people in the medical community, is there, especially if Michael's, the end was started with that TBI, do we know if there's an intervention point that can stop that from happening? Or is it basically, are there medical interventions, or is it basically just keeping them from self-harm?
Well, what's interesting is that when Mike had his TBI, I was working in Germany with this old, crusty, retired 06. He used to be an ER doc, and we were working primary care, and we're both emergency clinicians, so we hated it, right? They were like, where's the real stuff? Like, where's the gritty stuff? And when Mike got blown up, Bill Zesh, funny guy, but anyway, he said to me, he's like, you know what? They would put all these guys in a phenobarbital coma for a couple of days and give them a complete neurological rest. We wouldn't be seeing the shit that we're seeing right now. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you're nuts, but okay. But, I mean, there's no intervention because it's just, and I don't want to use the word cannon fodder, but it's like, okay, you had a night to sleep, let's send you back out there to get blown up again. And it's sequential and it's chronic.
Yeah.
Right? And the breaching that you all do cannot be underscored.
No.
Well, not only that, like, remember when they had the sensors on the helmets?
The overpressure sensors.
The overpressure sensors, and then you had guys going up in the little birds with, whatever caliber. I'm not.
The going on the helicopters would max out the overpressure sensors.
Well, then in firing weapons from a helicopter,
Yeah.
like they were just taking the sensors off and like throwing them away.
I've talked to a Jsoc sergeant major who said they used them and they were pegged out all the time, and it gets to the point, well, if we're not going to do things in an overpressure environment, it very quickly it's the point, well, we can't do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We can't do
And
it.
that's the challenge, is that, like you say, it's just, okay, dust them off and put them back out there. But there are really no other they don't have, just a line of people standing behind people like Mike, ready to take their spot when they need a break. It doesn't exist.
They don't. I mean, your deployment cycles are unreal.
There are, though, some, like Chuck O'Connor is really the guy to talk to about changing. When we did a past episode interview with him, if you guys want to check it out, where he talks about how we can adjust the TTPs, the explosive breaching standard operating procedures. He says how there's institutionally a feeling that breaching has to hurt, that it has to hurt. And he's like, that's just not true.
Right.
You follow the correct procedures.
It doesn't,
And you don't have to injure your own men doing explosive breaching. If you do, there's like maybe that 0.01% chance that you have to do an explosive breach in a hostage rescue situation. There are maybe certain missions of such national importance that you do have to have the operators that close to the breach point, but that is very, very few and far in between, and there's no reason why we need to have soldiers and Marines standing 15 feet away from the breach point in training and subjecting them to that.
15 feet, I wish.
Right,
like there. I mean, I remember breaches that like I dropped to my knee because it. And it's not the breacher's fault.
No, it's not. That's the
they're
training.
running up, putting a charge on a door that they don't know what's supporting that door. So it's like, we're going to go in one charge. Well, this is going to be the charge. P for plenty. We're getting in this door. And when you're like 1, 2, 3 back, it's like there's the breach, and then a while, then however long goes by until you're actually like cognizant again and ready to go through the door.
Well, remember in the 90s when it's like, it's the economy, stupid?
Yeah.
It's the brain injuries, stupid.
Right.
And, the way, at least in my estimation, to make the military change their tune is like, let's make it profitable. If you could convince, the military industrial complex that changing the way we fire weapons or the caliber with which we really need, or the way that we breach, or the way that we, go to war.
Right.
If there's a lot of money to be made in making it safer.
Sure. Yeah.
They'd be all over that.
Right.
Right. So what's
make it worth their while.
It just seems like we just have a lot of like, wet blankets in, decision-making positions right now who just don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
It's like, well, first of all, stop listening to people who are self-proclaimed gurus who come to you from an Ivy League institution like, oh, well, I know how to help soldiers feel better about themselves. Fuck you.
Right.
Like, fuck you.
Right.
Talk to the wives, talk to the spouses, talk to the families. We've actually lived and breathed it. And
Right.
we have this, it's not objective, but we have a line of sight on what these soldiers and personnel go through that you can't get from, some research institute, right?
Right.
And I'm not blaming anybody because, 2012, I think Casey was he SecDef? I don't know. Casey, General, I can't remember. There's a lot of names in my head right now. But, if you have somebody coming to you from a prestigious institution saying, I can help you with the soldier suicide problem, you're gonna bite on that hook. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But even and I had to do this because I was in the middle of my PhD, I had to read the fine print of their studies.
Mm-hmm.
And for legal reasons, they don't assess suicidality in all of these post-deployment batteries. And these guys know that they're not going to get redeployed and that their careers are going to go down the toilet if they don't respond perfectly to everything.
Right.
So they're gaming the system.
Right.
And there's this term in research called the screw you phenomenon, and it happens in the military, where if they're forced to do all of these post-deployment or pre-deployment or everything like that, screw you.
Right.
Like, they're just going to game it.
Right.
And, just the lack of statistical rigor and the lack of scientific rigor in some of these really large studies that the military is relying on is astounding.
Right.
Like, my graduate students would not pass their, like, comprehensive exams if they'd done it with the same methods that the military is using to study 400,000 or 500,000 people at a shot. It blows my mind.
That's it's frightening because we were talking about people who are on active duty who are doing this, which I guess are numbers that can be tracked or that that are tracked in some way, and I feel like people don't want to know what the post service, because while they're still in service, they still, like a lot of them, they still have that job to cling to, right? Unless they do something that creates the discipline, and but they still have that job to cling to. They still have people around them, that they're performing for. Like, I'm not going to let my buddy on the left or right down. I'm going to,
Right.
But then you get out and you don't have that anymore, and then you're dealing with a civilian populace that doesn't give a fuck about who you were or what you did. Doesn't have the same type of
They
camaraderie.
do, but they just don't know.
Yeah.
Like, they really, really care.
Yeah.
But there's just no frame of reference.
Yeah.
That's why you see these, like, sergeant majors and colonels, they retire and they just live in Fayetteville because they can go on the base. People call them by their old rank,
Well, they can go into, any restaurant.
Right.
And just have a chat with someone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, like, it's really hard, even for me, after divorcing Mike. I stayed in Fayetteville for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Because how else am I going to explain my life? Like,
it's a whole world.
I mean,
Yeah.
like-
It's yeah.
like now, like, I'm teaching in Canada, I'm in an administrative position, and, to try to explain, like, yes, my first husband was literally a spy, and he killed himself, and, well, that's kind of a buzzkill. Like,
Right.
how do you even have that conversation?
Right.
Right?
Right.
You can't. And even being at Fort Drum versus Fayetteville, just even, like, a difference between specialties or branches.
Right.
Nobody understands that.
Right.
Nobody gets that.
And,
Right.
and that only increases, I think, when you get into these little compartmentalized intelligence outfits that, Michael was essentially part of, like, a subculture. Like, very few people who understand that and can relate to it.
And who are you going to talk to about it?
Right.
Even from a family perspective.
Right.
Like, how do you go to a therapist about that?
I mean, honestly, like when I first joined the VA here, they made me go through, like, this mandatory 6 month, and I hated him. He was a nice guy. I'm sure you never watched the show, like, and this is years ago, but I hated, like, our sessions because I felt, here was somebody with nothing, and they don't necessarily need to have our background to be able to talk to us, but it's also like, I don't know you. I'm not going to open up to you. Like, I don't have any. You're not just going to sit there with your degree and think you know what's best for me. And that's how I felt. Now, I could be completely wrong, but yeah, like, you want to feel, if you're going to talk to somebody. I mean, here's an example, because there was a woman who I first met with, who I don't think she'd ever been military, but she'd been around the VA for a long time, and, like, she talked too. Like, she would relate. She would tell, I know that the therapist mode is to sit there and just kind of take it
Receive
in.
it,
Right.
yeah.
But, like, if she would tell me, like, times she had fucked up, like, it goes, okay, now this is just a conversation that I'm having with another person, instead of, like, me sitting here talking to some dude who doesn't, like, know shit about the world I come from. And I don't know, it's very difficult. And so when you lose, like, that peer network, and it sounds like, even though Michael was still active, because of how they were, segregated or whatever.
Right.
And him isolating himself more, but when you lose that peer network, and I think that's even, like, post-service, like, that sort of peer support thing, like, dudes flying places, because you'll take another guy from, Spec Ops, or another guy going, hey, like, shut the fuck up, put on your clothes, we're going to go get, grab a beer, or whatever. But it's so easy to isolate and start going down, like in the civilian community.
Well, what's interesting is that Mike's memorial service on Fort Meade, one half of it's a big chapel. One half of the chapel is filled with like blue suits, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's in their dress blues. And then the other half of the chapel was all of my military spouse and Army family who had flown in, driven in from everywhere just to be there, like for like a 2-hour thing. Like that was it. Just, like ride or die, just there. I mean,
that's amazing.
And the night before and the night after, like, I mean, when I, took or walked down with the elevator or whatever, they wheeled Michael down to the OR to get his organs. My first call was to a military spouse bestie that I'd been in Germany with who lived in DC. And I'm like, Mike's dead. So can I come stay at your house? Because I'm really tired. Of course, like everybody took off work. I mean, no question. Like we're going to sit there, we're going to drink all day and we're going to play cards. Like those are the people who walk through the fire with you, hands down.
Right.
And I love civilians. I work with civilians all the time. I'm technically a civilian, but to not have that kind of frame of reference,
right?
It's just so exhausting to explain yourself to
right.
somebody.
Yeah.
It's funny because I ran into a woman a colleague who was having, I didn't know her from Adam, but she was having a really hard day, and I just wound up talking to her, and she's like, I don't think you'd understand, like, I'm married to a guy, and this is in Canada, right? Like, I'm married to a guy, and he's special operations, and it's just really bad. And I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Try me, sister. Try me, because we can talk all day.
Yeah.
We can talk all fucking day about this, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I do know.
Yeah.
I do know what it's like. I know what the sleepless nights are when you're on your knees crying.
Yeah.
Like, please make him better. Like,
yeah.
You do know.
Yeah.
And there's only a certain select group of people who have lived that and walked through that.
Yeah.
And so to be apart from that, like, I get why all these veterans live in Fayetteville.
Yeah.
Who else is going to understand?
Right. Yeah.
Nobody chooses to live in Fayetteville.
Yeah.
Like when I was driving here and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be just on time. And I figured, like, I'll just tell him it was kind of like Riley Road, or like it was like dodging cars on Skybo, like, because of the traffic.
Right.
Like, there's just certain things that you're enculturated with that nobody else is going to understand. And if it's true for us, then it's got to be true for the spouses. It's got to be true for the guys.
So how, like, because we deal with both, with a lot of our guests with both post-traumatic stress and with the TBI. And again, I don't know that the medical community at large is because even post-traumatic stress isn't a specific thing, right? It's a diagnosis. It's multi-organ,
yeah, there's
right?
A lot of different things.
But I think that the medical community at large doesn't even have the awareness yet to try to separate those out. That if somebody goes in presenting of any kind of behavior, then it's probably post-traumatic stress, and we're going to treat for post-traumatic stress. Like, how do we deal with this? How do we help people from this point moving forward?
That's loaded, right?
Yeah.
So you were in for over a decade, easily.
8 years.
Okay. So let's just look at it like, time wise. So a bunch of people joined the military after 9/11, patriotically. And now, so I'm 42, right? So I was 21 when 9/11 happened. And a bunch of you and a bunch of other people were like, hell yeah, I'm going to go fight for whatever because somebody attacked my country. Well, now most of those people are in their early 40s.
Right.
Right? And, time lost is brain lost. So these are chronic degenerative issues that are going to get worse over time.
Right.
And, writing them off as a behavioral response it's lazy. It's clinically lazy because it's not just that, yes, we have behavioral responses to things, but all of you are trained to the nth degree to deal with things behaviorally. You're chosen for your ability to handle things behaviorally. So a lot of this is going to be physiological. And unfortunately for the military and for the medical community, if there's not money in it, then it might not get solved.
Right.
But here's a really good idea. how about we not go to war for 20 years?
Yeah, no, that's a great
starting
idea.
point.
That's
That's a
great
really
idea.
good starting point.
Yeah.
How about we not say mission accomplished
Right.
2 years into it and then stay there for
Right.
another 18?
Right.
How about we have a draft? How about we share the suffering?
Right.
Because the burden that has been placed on special operations is inordinate, and in my opinion, it's criminal.
Mm-hmm.
The fatalities, the injuries, I mean, just the lives wrecked by the op-tempo, the repeated deployments, the strain on your bodies. Like, all of you have the joints of 80-year-olds by the
yeah.
time you're 40, 50 years old. Like, I mean, no offense, but...
No, I just had another
Like-
knee surgery, so I totally understand.
And just, like, you know, we're just really starting to understand, like, the neurohormonal aspect of chronic stress and what that does to, you know, your cardiac function, your neurological function, just your ability to receive and, you know, process emotions or be engaged or show love and emotions to other people. You know, God bless my kids, but they're like, Mom, we swear to God, if you date or even, like, God forbid, marry another guy in the military, like,
Yeah.
they're like, we'll disown you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you are lovely, solid, patriotic, you know, strong, you know, kind people. But when it comes to the relational aspect, it gets ruined after that many deployments and that much,
Yeah.
you know, how do you come back from that?
No, absolutely.
You know? So to answer your original question, I mean, it's going to take a consortium of independent researchers who are able to say no to the government, and unfortunately the government gives our funding.
Right.
And that was another thing, like doing this research for my PhD, and especially talking to the media and suing the U.S. government for Michael's death. Not suing, but the tort claim.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, good thing I'm in Canada because I can kiss any federal funding goodbye.
Right.
And I am sure I'm on plenty of blacklists.
Right.
You know, fine, fuck, I'm out there.
I did want to ask you about
Yeah.
that, and that was kind of like how we concluded the article about
Yeah.
Michael, is that when Trump signed the NDAA, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it put a crack in the Ferris Doctrine. That
It was Rich Stayskull. He was a SF guy at Bragg whose lung cancer that you could have seen from space on the scans was just missed. And yeah, God bless him, like he got that overturned, the Ferris Doctrine.
And so the Ferris Doctrine, for people who don't know, it prevented soldiers from suing the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Or their family members.
Well, that was supposed to be like in World War II about like combat injuries. And then the military creatively expanded it so that even like birth accidents or, you know, spouses who receive medical care on post couldn't sue. I interrupted, sorry.
Well, so you and Michael's mother have both filed tort
Yeah.
claims
Yep.
For damages, claiming damages for Michael's death. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's different than, like, let's say a trial where
Right.
you're looking for some sort of conviction or some sort of apology even, or concession from the U.S. government to say we did something wrong here. It's really you're just making a claim for cash damages,
Wrongful death.
essentially.
Yep.
And they're going to say yes or no.
And they said no.
They did come back to you
To
and
me
say no.
and Mike's mom said no.
Really? When did that happen?
April, May, or March or April, yeah.
Holy shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, sorry, I should have updated you. Yeah, so they was like, yeah, there was no medical malpractice. And we're like, listen, idiots, that's not what we're claiming. We're
Right.
claiming negligence.
Right.
Because as federal employees, which members of the military are, they are beholden. And Mike died in the state of Maryland, thank God, for small mercies. Because in the state of Maryland, there's also additional, you know, kind of riders on that. Is that they basically failed to intervene. They were not criminally negligent because it's a civil process, right? But they sent him home to die.
Right.
So they denied it based on medical malpractice. And I'm like, well, I don't know if you're illiterate, but there's 2 points to that. One, medically you didn't intervene because nobody said, hey, this guy's psychotic. And you let him walk around the D.C. metro area with state secrets in his head. Which,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like, that's kind of dumb. Like, I'm surprised that these people are still in their positions because
Right.
that would get you fired. But, okay, so maybe there's a medical malpractice, but there's a whole other part to the claim where it's negligence. It's just pure negligence. And so that's the part that they didn't address that I can reclaim for.
But also, I mean, does this now, are you now going to escalate this into a lawsuit?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got time.
And really, I mean, that's sometimes the only way
It is the only way.
to I don't want to say teach the government a lesson, but to get them to course correct, to change things, is you have to make it hurt.
Yeah, and like, you know, it's my siblings and I, we were just kind of communicating movie quotes. And I don't know if you remember the movie, like, Man on Fire.
Yeah.
Just like, anybody who was involved, anybody who benefited from it, I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Cannot fucking wait.
So have you guys, I mean, I'm sure you have, do you have plans to expand that out to a class action for all families who's like, you know, special ops people have?
I think that's a fabulous idea. But you know how they say, like, never be the first in anything?
Sure.
I'm the first.
Right.
Pretty much.
Right.
To sue, or for lack of a better term, to sue the government for wrongful death for a suicide, especially post-Ferris, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were the one that told me that the Army only responds to shame in lawsuits.
Yeah.
Now, I'm thinking of having it tattooed on my chest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they you know, the shame, it's so easy to not be ashamed by it because it's always somebody else's fault, right?
Right.
But if they have to pay out a couple $1 million, and if I set precedent, or when I set precedent,
Right.
then hopefully other families can just be like, oh, see that precedent where, like, Rocklein versus the United States government, see that? Yeah. That's going to probably force a change. But the key is there's not a lot of attorneys who have either the balls or the experience to take it on.
Right.
And if they do, they're involved in, like, huge, like, other cases, and they just don't know what to do with it. Like,
Right.
it doesn't really fit medical malpractice. So it is wrongful death, but, like, who do they really go after?
Right.
So I would hate to do this, but I'll just go after everybody individually.
Right.
I know their names.
Yeah.
I know the names of everybody in his unit.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, man. Like, sorry, but I will go after you.
Right.
The person who heard him articulate his plans for death. You didn't do anything. You're negligent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry that I'm going to ruin your career, but you were a sergeant major and you didn't do anything. I'm going after you because sometimes you just have to hurt feelings and step on toes so this shit doesn't happen again. Because if I could prevent that for,
Right.
like, you know, what my children have gone through,
Right.
and they're doing really well,
Right.
but, like, that was really hard.
Right.
It's still really hard. It never goes away.
Right.
I would just prefer nobody else goes through that. And if that means that I have to start, you know, kicking in doors on Capitol Hill, I'll do it.
Right.
You want to sit me in front of a Senate Armed Services Committee? I have binders.
Yeah.
Like, I can sit there for hours.
You're right.
And I can answer all the stupid questions that stupid people want to ask me. But there's also going to be smart people in that room, too. So
Are there any politicians who have, or retired military with clout, or anybody who has taken interest in this case, or not this case, but this cause?
I don't know because I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
Dave, I think Dee sent you some questions on your phone.
Okay.
Just one.
Oh. That one person who's watching.
It's probably that sergeant major that you're thinking of suing.
He's like, please don't sue me. I have a 20% APR on my truck.
So, where are you today? What is your where's your work taking you? What are you working on now?
I put it down for a little bit.
Yeah.
That was a grind. Like,
Yeah.
it racked me for a bit. Like, it's really odd to, like, defend your dissertation and have pictures of your first husband in there, right?
Right.
Like, so, I mean,
Right.
I had to breathe for a bit. I also had to, like, go on antidepressants. I mean, it's not only is it, like, the aftermath of dealing with Michael's death, but also, like, oh, I have to finish
You're like
this.
reliving it all the time.
Yeah,
Because,
so
yeah.
it was re-traumatizing.
Yeah.
So it's been a year
Yeah.
where I didn't touch it. But what's weird is that it bleeds into other areas. So like emergency docs and nurses during COVID, you know, why are they now suicidal? And people are like, oh, Kate, well, you've done research on this. So I started studying that. And actually, that's why I was overseas. I was in Scotland presenting on that. So I studied, like, I did a study on suicidality in clinicians during COVID. And same thing, they're high performers, they're self-concealers, they're perfectionists, and, like, they're suffering. So there's it translates to a lot of different but I even see it in, like, undergraduate nursing students too. But but as far as doing more research or continuing or like doing another round of interviews with operators or like putting out more, trying to recruit more participants, I had to not touch it for a minute.
I decided to take a break too after Michael's article and the one I wrote about Bill Mulder, and I realized it took me so long to write those, and when I would sit down at the keyboard to write, like my hands would not move.
Yeah.
And I realized like I've just been covering this stuff for too long. Like I need to take a break from it for a while.
Has there, whether it was part of your research or just in general, because we've been talking about the military and special ops, but now you're talking about another community.
Yeah.
And I've always had this idea that suicide is also mimetic, right? That it's also like it is a socially spread illness at times. When one part of a community starts doing that,
it gives permission to the rest.
It puts it's there, it's now sort of part of the thought process.
Yeah. Like people see it as a solution
Yeah.
or at least an option.
Yeah, and especially like the more people you see from your community, the more it seems like a valid, because, that guy wasn't weak. He was tired. I'm not depressed. I'm just tired. I'm just, you know what I mean? And like, what else is there? I've done it all. You know what I mean? So sort of that.
That I agree with you there. I also think there's a desensitization that comes, right?
Okay.
Like, and I see this too in like my own clinical background, is that death isn't scary anymore.
Right.
Like I've seen a lot of people die, and so have you.
Yeah.
And no offense, but some at your own hand, right?
Yeah.
So, it demystifies it.
Yeah.
And the older we get, like, life is not simple. Life is complex. Life is hard, and
Right.
people die, and it's tragic, and you get heartbreak, and there's all sorts of good things too. But I mean, hence the antidepressants, because I found myself thinking, I'm like, wow, Mike really is in a better place.
Yeah.
Because you leave all this tragedy in your wake.
Right.
And it's a release, like,
Right.
or it's an escape.
Right. Right.
So I see what you're saying about the mimicry of it, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of gives people permission, but it also can be enticing.
Right. No, absolutely.
Like God, if you're dead, you don't have to deal with all the
Right.
shit that we have to.
Right.
And you guys are dealing with a lot. There's a long war.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a long life after that war.
Right.
Right? And also, like, the relationships that, and I'm not saying that all of you get divorced or all of you have bad relationships, but the ones
I've only had 2 divorces.
Yeah,
I think
I-
Jack's only had 2.
Only
I mean,
2.
Yeah.
well, now I've got 2 too. So
Yeah,
I mean, like,
yeah.
the people who haven't gone through that in special operations are kind of unicorns.
Right.
So I think death is kind of welcome in a sense.
Right.
I mean, that sounds really bad.
No,
but
I totally understand,
Yeah.
because it's not. I think that a lot of people, when they look at a lot of civilians or a lot of people outside the community, when they look at the special forces community and if they think about suicide, it's like, oh yeah, they must have seen some really horrible shit, and that's why. And really, I think that for a lot of people, that it's like, I was doing like everything I had ever dreamt of, and it's like, what wonders does life have for me now?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's not the trauma of that time, and not that there wasn't trauma, right, and whatnot, but it's more, outside of the post-traumatic stress and outside of the TBI and outside of everything else. I think the thing is like, I had a good run, I had a good ride, like I did what I wanted to do.
Sometimes grown-ass men crying their eyes out because they miss their friends.
Yeah.
They're not on their team anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that, I mean, using my own experience, which is not like I never put on a uniform. Like I'm not even pretending to know what that's like. But in my experience, or from what I've seen, is that it's not like you guys are really traumatized by what you've seen and done. Like that's part of the job. You
Right.
expect that. It's all the aftermath.
Right.
It's not being able to reintegrate with your family.
Right.
It's getting divorced and not seeing your kids because your ex-wife moved back home. Like, it's all of that, like, emotional disengagement or obstacles to having, like, lighthearted, fun, just basic joys that
Yeah.
you can't experience anymore, right? It's the loss of humanity in a sense. Not that you're inhuman, but it's
You're right, though.
I envy even people within my own family
Yeah.
who have complaints or worries that are not life altering. I'm
Right.
like, wow, how nice would that be?
Right.
Like, and previously I'd be like, God, I can't believe you're bitching about this. Like, are you?
I know, I used to look down at people for like bitch about first world. I've gotten over that, but it used to be like, that's not a real fucking problem.
No, I mean, now I'm jealous.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of your small problems.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of the fact that, oh, your husband doesn't take his trash out. Well, mine jumped off a parking deck.
Right.
So, I mean,
Right.
in retrospect, in comparison, that would be...
What does the chat have for us?
So, K-Jam, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Any thoughts on Center for Deployment Psychology's use of CPT, challenging internal dialogue for post-traumatic stress TBI patients being efficacious, especially for the high-performer personality cluster you outlined?
So I think that any therapy is worthwhile. If it works, like, even if it sounds stupid, if it works, it's not stupid, right? I think what we run into is... so there was an ongoing study as of 2020 where, and this was a really interesting one because I looked into the researchers' work and they were based out of DC for the military, very well intentioned, and they were looking at inflexible thinking, right? Looking at like cognitive rigidity. And what was interesting about their interim report, because when you're funded, you have to provide interim reports, right? And their interim report said that none of the units would participate. Not because these commanders don't care.
Right.
And I'm assuming, this is what I'm reading into it. I don't think it's that they don't care. I think it's just they have been hit so many times with these good idea fairies.
Right.
Where it's like, what is this going to do?
Right.
And not only that, reading like their premise and their proposal for this research, they're very well intentioned. They're taking like civilianized ideas and trying to apply them to a special operations population. And I'm thinking, these guys in SOF are some of the most adaptive, creative people I've ever met in my life. Like, you can make something out of nothing every single time. So it's not that you're inflexible or rigid or too concrete in your thinking. I think it's that the clinical community doesn't understand how you think or how you operate.
See, and I think that is one of the real challenges, both in dealing with civilians, the whole... you were in combat? How did you, did you have to kill somebody? How did you get over that? And it's like, there was nothing to get over. Like, they were bad guys. Like, people can't, and so that goes back to the therapy and probably these studies, is that even the most well-intentioned and as objective as they can be, people, when they put these together, or when you're speaking with a therapist, and it's like they're projecting their values and what they think. So, how do you feel? Having been in combat, having killed people, that must really affect you. And it's like, well, if that's where you're starting out from, like, your premise is completely wrong.
I'll give you an example. So one of the first lectures that I give, and when I'm teaching graduate statistics, is the response to stressful events scale. Okay. So, and my dad, bless him, he's always like, how's your stress level? And I'm like, well, I don't have to move anywhere and nobody's getting deployed, so I'm fine. Everything's good.
Right.
But when you look at this scale of stressful events, the top three are like, somebody dies, somebody gets divorced, somebody moves away, or like all of these like top huge stressors. And and I use it as teaching for my students because you have to think about context, right? So for people like us, for lack of a better term, all that stuff is old hat. Like, I can pack up a house and move. Like, I can move to another country. I can move to another country 34 weeks pregnant, which I've done. Like, that's not stressful. And so when you have that kind of therapeutic context, I think those are very worthwhile ideas, but I think that it has to be administered by a therapist who absolutely has the context in their back pocket.
Right.
And I think that, like, when I was divorcing Mike and I had the psychologist, marriage counselor who used to be a ranger telling me, like, walk away.
Right.
Walk away now. That was important because he knew, like, he'd lived it, he'd breathed it. He knew, he'd been to the circus, he'd seen the side shows. So I think all of that's really worthwhile. But I think there's such a distinct difference between, like, MedCom in the Army, like medical command, and then, soft medicine, or, Mother Army and or USASOC. So, or even within USASOC, like, there's USASOC and then there's SF. So, to have people who are actually who've marinated and experienced all these things that they need to then deliver therapy for.
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely important, and they don't pull from SOF enough to have clinicians or therapists or whomever. And I'm just thinking about like 18 Deltas or, Ranger Medics or whatever. Send them to grad school. Like, send them to programs where they can actually do therapy and they can deliver it to the people that they're used to operating among.
Mm-hmm.
And, they might go to school, they might not go to school, but then they're lost to Mother Army or they're lost to MedCom when they could actually be back in the unit, treating people where they actually understand the problem. So I think all of these ideas have merit. And I do think that in the traditional research, if you look at like cognitive inflexibility or rigidity or that kind of like repetitive, inflexible thinking, it does precipitate mental health problems and it does do bad things. Mm-hmm. But you're also talking to a population where...
Like, being flexible is part of the key.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think that's the problem.
Right.
I think getting caught in a loop that you can't get out of is an issue.
Right.
To see no way out, I think that definitely precipitates suicide.
Right.
And also, like, just to allow failure.
Right.
Like, failure is so important. And to be able to fail and not lose your career is really important as well.
Right.
You got a DUI. That was that was a dumb decision, but why were you drinking? Oh, well, you were drinking because of this.
Right.
The zero tolerance stuff is just like cancel culture.
Right.
There's no redemption if it's
Right.
zero tolerance.
Right.
Oh, you have an alcohol-related incident, now you're out of the group.
Seen that happen to so many dudes who gave their entire lives to special forces, and then they get one DUI because because their marriage has fallen apart.
Yeah.
Their kids are in another state they can't see.
Yeah.
They're dealing with PTSD and TBI.
Yeah.
I mean, I know these people personally.
Well, or even worse than that is...
And the unit just fucks them.
They do. They absolutely fuck them
When you
over.
get in a bar fight, you're not the one who started it, but because alcohol was involved, it's an alcohol-related... And you're out.
And
Like,
I'm going to editorialize a little bit. Well, not editorialize. This actually happened, and this guy is out of the Army now. But he got charged with an alcohol-related incident because he was going through some shit. And one of his Army buddies called the police to his home, like, hey, you got to check out my boy. He's having some trouble. The police came to his house. He goes out on the front deck of the house, out on his front porch, and he'd been drinking. Met with the police. The police talked to him. And I guess I don't know if they actually arrested him, like put him in cuffs or not, but they're like, we're going to take you for mental
self-protection.
Yeah,
health.
Okay, right.
And because he was drunk at that time, the unit decided it was an alcohol-related incident and did everything they could have done to chapter him out of the Army when he had like 19 years in, boot him out of the Army and take his tab away. They did everything they could because I think he probably was legitimately a behavior issue at that point, but he'd like given his whole life to the unit, and now he was suffering and he needed help, and they did everything they could to fuck with him, and it was only because of maybe I can tell more of the story later on, but it took massive intervention to prevent that from happening to this guy, and he's doing okay now, thank God.
That did happen, and the reason I'm interrupting is because I am sorry, but I wanted to get this out.
Please.
There was a window, and I'm glad you brought this up, from like 2011, 2014, where they were pulling tabs from guys who went to their unit or went to whomever and said, I'm really struggling, or guys who like self-admitted themselves would go to the ER, get admitted to psych or whatever. They would just rip their tab. They would pull their tab because they were behavior issue or they were whatever. And I don't know who was making those decisions. I know who was in, high command at that time, and I think they're shitty decisions because that's the isolating versus insulating. That's the marginalizing.
But meantime, they're telling you something else. They're telling you can get help.
But it keeps suicides off the books.
Right. That's the thing.
It keeps suicides off the books. So if we get these guys out of the
Right.
regiment...
Right. They're not our problem.
They're not our problem anymore.
Right.
If they're in Mother Army and they commit suicide, that's not on special forces
They're not
books.
pulling their tab because these guys have done something wrong. They're pulling their tab to cover their ass so that they're not a statistic.
Thank you.
That's what they're
CYA.
doing. Yeah, exactly. It's self-serving.
That's why there's a big conversation now. People talk about wokeness in the military. Before that, it was political correctness. And in my opinion, it's really corporatization.
Yes, it
and it's
is.
that cover your ass corporate mentality that we're trying. It's about protecting careers at the end of the day.
Sure. Yeah, it's something else.
There are some really, really, really good soldiers whose tabs were pulled. I mean, one of my most beloved, Army family members, whatever, had his tab pulled.
What an insult. I mean, what an absolute insult.
It's like you're dealing with some shit. Let's cut your balls off.
And honestly, when you've been in for 16, 17 years, whatever, the officer responsible for pulling your tab, like, they haven't been in that position for very, like, they're making an expedient. They're making an expedient decision to protect their career.
I believe it's the commanding general of the JFK Special Warfare Center that pulls tabs. I think he's the actual authority that does that.
From the school?
Yeah, from the schoolhouse.
Why would it be the schoolhouse? That
Because
pulls
it's
established
awarded
tabs
by the
then?
schoolhouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think they have authority over that.
Well, let's go back and look who was commanding the schoolhouse.
Well,
during
and
those
honestly,
years.
though, they may not be operating with all the other. Like, they don't personally
They
know.
they
the
might just get
soldier.
the recommendation.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
know the soldier.
I believe there is a packet that gets submitted. Yeah.
Whatever it is, whoever it is, like it's absolutely bullshit. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. Again, it's that saying, hey, if there are problems, we want to help. But hey, let us know if there are problems so we can fucking DX your ass and so that you're not a statistic on our books. There's no problem here. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, exactly.
No data, no problem.
No problem. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So wrap things up here. Like final thoughts. We covered a lot in here. Is there anything else you want to say about your work, about Michael, about where things stand today, about this issue in the military? Are they grappling with it better?
No. No, they're not. I mean, well, and the thing is, the war's over now. Mm-hmm. Now they're the VA's problem.
Right.
I mean, no offense to the VA, because they're full of very well-intentioned, educated, dedicated people, but the VA doesn't really handle problems all that well, do they?
No.
So now it's just a kick the can. It's a kick the can.
The medical staff in the VA, at least here in New York, they're phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it's the VA.
The system.
It's the behemoth.
It's
a behemoth.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, for people who might be watching who, because one of the challenges sounds like with Michael had and other people had is like you can, if you wanted to take a trite view of this, you could say, if somebody's having problems, they should like man up and go see somebody and not like you whatever.
Michael did.
But not only that, but we're talking about people who honestly don't even know that they have a problem sometimes. Like, nothing, things aren't right, but their perspective is shut down so much sometimes.
Well, I mean, for Michael's case, he was literally psychotic, like psychosis, like in full-blown psychosis.
Right.
And they're just like, okay, go on leave, have a good leave.
Right. So for either people, our men and women who are either in uniform, who are veterans, or maybe they know somebody, they're a family member, or they have a friend who seems to be going through these behavioral changes. How do you intervene? How do you get them the help they need? And how do you make sure they go to somebody who can differentiate that post-traumatic stress from the TBI from this? Like, what can people do if they find themselves in a similar situation?
So, Kate 1.0 would have probably said, start here and do this and, see this person. If they don't give you the right answer you need, go see this person because that's what I did and that's the process. At this point, having, a dead husband and, 2 traumatized children, I would say just start screaming. Mm-hmm. Just start screaming to anybody who will listen. Screw the career. It's better to have them alive. Call your congressman. If you get any flack or any kind of ignorance from anybody, jump the chain. Mm-hmm. The career will be there. And, they might be pushing papers at, Human Resources Command, but they'll be alive. Mm-hmm. And really just start rattling cages. I don't think that spouses understand, and I certainly didn't, how much power you actually have because we're so conditioned to not do anything to mess with their career. Mm-hmm. But if I'm doing a shoulda, woulda, coulda, like a decade ago, if I had just said to Mike, fuck this, like, we'll live in a trailer and I'll work nights in the ER and you'll be alive, we'd have a much different life. But I bought into it too, right? I bought into the mystique and the career and the cool guy shit and doing all of the, like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Like, yeah, that's part of it. And the long tabs are nice and all the I love me's and everything like that. That's, don't buy into it. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter. What matters is being alive.
And then and again, whether they're active duty or veterans, like, we've all heard the sort of the suicide speech. Okay, if people start giving their stuff away, if, they start doing this stuff, like, those are the people to watch. But you're talking about a community that is good at self-concealing. And so are there signs? Because I think all of us have known people who took their life and there was not, like, there weren't these flares going up. Like, you're like, what the fuck just happened?
It's almost like a switch flips, right?
Right.
Like, everything seems okay and then boom, they're gone.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because the traditional civilian signs are much different than the other signs.
That there are cries for help, or there are indicators a lot of times.
I would say that, from what I've studied and read, is that if they are under investigation, if they have been disciplined, if they've fucked up in some way career-wise, be hypervigilant.
Okay.
Hypervigilant. If their marriage is disintegrating, no, they didn't marry a hoe. Like, she's not just walking off with another guy.
Right.
If she is, it might be because that guy's nice and isn't, torturing her. But pay really close attention to the disintegrating marriages, because it's not the lifestyle that's making the marriages disintegrate. It's, like, the emotional terrorism inside the house, usually. And, like, no offense, because we've all been married and divorced, and I'm not saying any of you
Sure. I mean, occasionally we'll marry a stripper and it doesn't work out for some whatever reason.
Like, I understand that. Like, marrying a stripper sounds like a lot of fun, to be honest with you.
And give her power of attorney the day before you deploy.
Right, exactly.
Who does that?
Yeah, nobody.
Yeah, they're hot and they're fun. Why not?
And they really, really love us.
Sure they do. I mean, I love TRICARE too. I'm in Canada now, so TRICARE is irrelevant. But pay really close attention to disintegrating families, because it's not just par for the course. And I think I read it. It was like 2013 by Greg Zaroya, I think, in USA Today. And he interviewed a bunch of operators whose marriages had disintegrated, and like a good 20% of them are like, I just wish I'd never been married at all. And I think that goes beyond just normal regret. Mm-hmm. I think that goes to, I am emotionally bereft and I cannot be married or be in a relationship. I think there are flags that we haven't seen are flags, and they really are, and it needs more study. Okay. And I'm one person.
Yeah,
like
right.
I can't. I think it needs a different analytical approach.
Right.
And to stop militarizing civilian research methods and data. We're trying to solve this with civilian methods, and that's not going to work. It's contextually distinct.
Right.
So I think you really need people who have experience doing the research or have some perspective on it and context to do the research. And you have to allow the research. Like, I know this community pretty well, and thank God I do, because that's why I'm the only person who's actually done what they call in vivo, like person to person. Uh-huh. Like, I'm literally the only person in the literature, to my knowledge, who's done face-to-face interviews about suicide and resilience with these guys. And all the rest have been like, oh, here's a survey.
Right.
Like, you're not going to get answers about that. And what really affects these guys, from what I studied and found, is like, pregnancy loss. And, these normal things that you don't think would affect these really, tough, gritty, operator, door kicker type people, they are seriously affected by the same things that affect us. Like, one guy told me about, infertility and pregnancy loss, how that just killed him on deployment. Right. And, how another was telling me about, the time that they made him spend on resilience training. He just wanted to be with his family. Right. Like, to have that dwell time and to just not be, like the answers they gave were just mind blowing, and so many of them sought refuge in like water, whether it was surfing or, I mean, just all of this really rich information that you don't get from post-deployment surveys or anything like that. Like,
there's some thought too about military spouses frequently having miscarriages, and why are there environmental factors on military bases?
I had 4. No reason.
Again, I don't have statistical data on it, but I know there's anecdotally there's a lot of people talking about it behind the scenes. Like, why is this happening so frequently to this population?
Well, Camp Lejeune just has a class action for what was in their water. Like, these are not healthy places.
And we know that on-base housing has had
that's
huge,
been the
huge
biggest
issues.
racket for years.
Yeah. And issues with I mean, I've interviewed people who their kids had all kinds of problems because of the
mold,
bad drinking
the
water,
rampant mold.
Young kids and even special forces guys happen to have an inhaler suddenly because of black mold in the home. But so that's a totally different podcast.
Well, no, but I mean, it's true. Like atypical cancers in special forces, like I published on that, and like you guys have really, really weird cancers at really young ages. I mean, there's a lot of exposures that we just don't know about. And that might be part of it too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at CTE, and that was part of the issue when I was doing my master's research with TBI, is that there was no, like, I had to use all this proxy research with CTE and sports medicine. And it's so different. And there's so many different environmental exposures that it's going to take independent researchers that have no affiliation with the government. Because as soon as you tie research funding, that biases your findings. My first doctorate, when I was studying SF medics, like initially I was working with command, right? And then one of them said, he's like, well, what if you find something that's really unflattering to our command? And I'm like, thanks, bud. Now I can't work with you anymore because you said that out loud, and now you just biased my whole study. So our relationship's over. Like, just that kind of command influence. You have to do things without command influence. You have to be able to research without that. And
good luck.
Yeah.
It's the DoD that's giving you money.
Right.
They can pull strings a bit. So we need a lot of independence, and we need independent scientists to take a look at this. Because, I mean, y'all are just going to age.
Well, hopefully.
And it's just going to show more and more, right?
I mean, I think that it's sort of like the VA's grand plan is. That's why it takes like 30 days plus to get an appointment. Is they're just waiting for everybody to die off.
Well, you joke, but there's some truth to
I'm
that.
not really joking.
Yeah.
I'm not really joking. Like
when they give you an appointment for 6 months later, in that interim, people are dying.
Right. No, I'm not really joking about that. Like they make it very inconvenient. I mean, and hopefully maybe like your tort suit, this lawsuit, and more the following, maybe at some point that'll shake enough trees that somebody will go, okay, we need an outside source that is independently investigating this and getting answers. Hopefully, because it hurts too much. We can't afford these constant lawsuits.
Well, and without making it financially hurt, a billion gazillion dollar organization like the U.S. military, and there's no fiber of my being that wants to put an enlisted family through a lawsuit.
Right.
But you know what? I will.
Yeah.
If you knew that Mike was at risk of dying and you didn't do anything, I'll haul you into court.
Yeah.
And I'll make you answer for it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that to an individual, but if I do that to an individual, other people might think twice about sending somebody home who's at high risk for death.
Right.
Because nobody wants that.
Right.
So,
that's rough.
I'm sorry, but there's going to have to be some sacrificial lambs in this.
Yeah.
Because my family, my kids, we sacrifice plenty.
Yeah.
And it's time for people to pony up and give some answers.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in on a Sunday and doing this interview. This is not a very common conversation that I think it's held, particularly on these like special ops military podcasts. Like we don't necessarily talk about these subjects enough, and with the sort of depth that you're able to speak to it is just very rare.
It's really weird. I mean, it's like life imitating art, imitating life. Like it just like obviously this is an issue. If this is how much it's happened in my own life, right.
So yeah, I really appreciate you, being so open about it and, sharing so much of, Michael and ultimately your own life and your kids' lives with me, that it did definitely feel like uncomfortable at some level, where I was like inside Michael's mind for a while, and seeing all these personal details of your guys' life that I'm like, should I even really know about this? Like,
Yeah.
it feels very like I was invading mostly Michael's privacy. But I hope that through this conversation and through some of the stuff, the article about him, that we're able to hopefully help somebody else out there.
Yeah.
And while we're on that subject, I'll go ahead and plug that Sound Off app again. Not that I have nothing to do with it, other than I know some of the
they're
people
not.
involved.
They're not a sponsor. This
Yeah.
is just us.
And they're a non-for-profit, and so if you guys check the link down in the description, you can find Sound Off. And again, that's for people in the intelligence community, special operations, anywhere in the military or governmental service, people who are afraid of being stripped of their security clearance, that they're going to face career repercussions. They can get on this app and they can get clinical help anonymously. Without informing their chain of command or their superiors. So I'll just plug that again. Maybe that can help somebody who's hurting out there.
There's no point in privacy if it just might as well share it all. I mean, yeah, and that app is really important. Really, really important. All of this is important. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to share anything because you're trustworthy. You understand. And if we don't talk, it's just going to persist if we don't talk about it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again, and thank you everyone who joined us for this episode, for this bonus episode. And we'll see all you guys on Friday. We're going to be back in the studio. We're going to have an awesome guest on the show. Look forward to talking to him and seeing all of you again. So thank you, Kate.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for having
Appreciate it.
me.
Thanks, everybody.